If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 61 Magical Self-Defense Tactical Training Class 4. Regardless of the punches that missed him, Asterion walked towards Neville with calm and slow steps. What happened? Where is your hatred? Asterion spoke sarcastically while displaying a cold and indifferent smile. Technically, I should never care about someone who would never touch me if I didn't want to, but your family had to be my enemy. But don't worry, your body will be of great help to me and my plans. Feel honored, Neville, for you will finally be useful. He spoke, but his voice could not be heard by others, except himself and Neville. Neville, who heard everything, gritted his teeth, his blue eyes were so cold they could probably freeze the Gobi Desert. He spoke to Asterion for the first time. If it weren't for your cursed family, my parents would be fine, he said. I would have a happy family, and my grandmother wouldn't look at me with disappointment. I swear by all that is sacred, I will kill you and your cursed family, Neville finished, stepping back as he assumed a fighting stance. His hoarse and cold voice hung in the air. Ha ha ha! Asterion laughed. He pushed his hair back and smiled, displaying a sadistic and malicious grin. I wouldn't complicate things, but because of your words, you and anyone you care about will suffer, Neville Longbottom. At this moment, your grandmother is sitting in an armchair in the living room, looking at the portrait of her son and daughter-in-law above the fireplace. With each word Asterion spoke, Neville's pale face grew paler. Neville, I will break you, Asterion spoke, his eyes cold. I will destroy your family during the Christmas holidays in December. In the meantime, I want you to know that I will be watching you every moment. I want you to know that I will be coming, and you can't do anything to stop me. You will be a prisoner of your own paranoia while I delight in watching you and your family burn in the flames, just as London burned once. Asterion finished, mere inches from Neville. The boy remained completely paralyzed, shocked by the disturbing threat. Asterion reached out and grasped Neville's neck, whispering in his ear. See? Just a movement of my hand and your neck will snap. How does it feel to have your life in someone else's hands? Do you hate yourself? Do you hate your weakness? Do you hate the fate that made you this way? Asterion looked directly into Neville's eyes as he spoke. Releasing Neville's neck, Asterion smiled gently as he held his face with kindness. I will kill you, it will be painful and cruel, but don't blame me, blame yourself, for being weak and incompetent. Weakness has always been the original sin of the world. Without caring about what he had done to a 13-year-old teenager, Asterion stepped back and snapped his fingers, releasing the sound vacuum around them. Turning to Professor Irene, Asterion spoke with a calm and indifferent tone. I surrender, Professor. Neville has won. He then turned back to Neville and spoke coldly. Enjoy the taste of victory, Neville, for it will be the only triumph over me you'll have. Think of it as my mercy toward you. You see, I am very kind. With that said, he exited the ring, indifferent to the stares falling upon him. Irene looked at Asterion walking away and at the terrified, still frozen Neville. Like a veteran orator, she could imagine what Asterion had said to Neville. The hatred between House Longbottom and House Black wasn't a secret, although this hatred was only on the part of House Longbottom. Technically, House Black had never done anything against House Longbottom. The tortures suffered by Alice and Frank Longbottom were caused by Bellatrix Lestrange and her husband, along with other accomplices. Apart from Bellatrix, who was born a Black, House Black hadn't actually done anything against House Longbottom. But since House Longbottom didn't have a target to channel their hatred towards, they focused on House Black. Irene sighed and looked pityingly at the boy. She didn't know how he had been accepted into Hogwarts, but it was foolishness to live under the same roof as their enemies. As for speaking up for Neville, that thought never crossed Irene's mind. Going against a special grade wizard? Sorry, she wasn't so altruistic as to want to sacrifice herself for a student. Among the Gryffindor girls group, Rose frowned with displeasure. While the others couldn't hear the words exchanged between the two, she could, and every cold and sadistic word impacted her mind. Asterion had revealed himself to be cold, cruel, and incredibly sadistic. It was a side of him that Rose had never witnessed before, a dark and obscure side that she didn't appreciate one bit. She preferred his sarcasm, his honesty, and the noble behavior he usually displayed, worthy of a true noble, not the cruel and sadistic monster she was seeing at that moment. With clenched fists, Rose stared at Asterion with determination. I won't let you succumb to the dark side, Starlight. As for Neville, Rose was determined to help him. In her eyes, he was blaming the wrong people. Transferring someone else's sins onto another just because of their family ties was incredibly wrong. She would help both reconcile, even if it meant throwing a few punches at both boys. In the Slytherin boys group, no one spoke or attempted to initiate a conversation with him. Even a fool like Draco could see that Asterion was in a bad mood. The temperature around him even seemed slightly colder than the surrounding environment. While Asterion kept his gaze fixed on Neville, who had recovered from his fear, something unexpected happened. The descendant of House Longbottom showed no sign of fear when their eyes met. Instead, he stared deeply into Asterion's eyes. The heir of House Black saw a burning hatred against him in Neville's eyes, but he wasn't shaken. He realized that Neville possessed a trump card to protect himself from his wrath in December. If asked what it could be, Asterion had his suspicions, or rather, two of them. Albus Dumbledore and the press. It was evident that Albus Dumbledore would protect his allies. It would be the minimum that a leader would do when his subordinates were under threat. Neville could also use the press to warn about the imminent attack from Asterion against House Longbottom, causing many to turn against him. However, if Neville thought that Asterion would back down in the face of the most powerful man in the world, he was mistaken. Asterion was determined to wipe out the entire House Longbottom, indifferent to the consequences. He didn't care if he was discovered, he would even attack during the day to witness the horror on Neville's face when the time came. As for the consequences of his actions, Asterion was aware. He would likely be labeled as the Dark Lord, but even in the face of such serious consequences, he wished to send a clear message, a bloody and cruel message to everyone, enemies and allies alike. Especially with the imminent arrival of Voldemort and the potential civil war within the Pureblood faction. Suddenly, as Asterion was deep in thought, he felt his hand being held, and his fingers intertwined with slender ones. In the next moment, he felt another soft and delicate body pressed against his own. He didn't need to see to know who was holding his hand and leaning on him, there was only one person who could do that: Daphne, his fiancée. Looking sideways, he found her head resting on his shoulder, looking directly at him with a gentle and warm gaze. The anger Asterion felt when Neville spoke about *ling his family faded like ice in the sun in the face of that warm gaze. He said nothing, and Daphne remained silent. Author's thoughts: Hogwarts has been unexpectedly irritating and boring to write, it's *ling my desire to write, so I'm going to speed things up a bit. Let's start the missions. I hope you enjoyed it. Laughing face. Chapter 60, School Council. In the Slytherin common room at Hogwarts, Asterion found himself relaxing, savoring a glass of whiskey as he let his thoughts wander freely. The explosion of emotions that occurred in the tactical magical self-defense training room led him to an inescapable conclusion: it was urgent for him to learn to better control his emotions. Asterion, despite being human, acknowledged his flaws. His need for familial affection was a vulnerability that could be exploited by anyone with enough power and courage. Therefore, he committed himself to further refining his emotional control, determined not to expose such feelings in front of his enemies again. However, mastery over his emotions did not mean that Asterion would hesitate to destroy the Longbottom house. On the contrary, after calming down completely, his determination to eradicate his enemies was strengthened even more, as if it were forged in steel. Someone must pay for his fury. At this moment, Asterion realized that Neville and Dumbledore had probably discovered his supposed weakness, his connection to family. He had no doubt that they would both try to use it against him. However, he himself was not deterred. Inside the Black Manor, even if Dumbledore ventured there, he would only leave in a coffin. Without a shadow of a doubt, Asterion was convinced that Arcturus would not hesitate to sacrifice himself, unleashing the destruction of the Black Manor itself along with Dumbledore's presence, thereby releasing the cursed spirit sealed at the mansion's entrance. As he left the confines of the residence, Asterion planned to unleash special-grade cursed spirits, particularly difficult to eliminate, upon each member of the Black House. He yearned to witness who would have the audacity to attempt to ambush Narcissa, Bellatrix, and Arcturus. Lord Black. Upon hearing someone calling for him, Asterion opened his eyes, finding the young man standing at a respectful distance. It was Marcus Flint, the captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team. Headmaster Snape asked me to inform you that your presence has been requested at the Hogwarts School Council chamber, the boy said, bowing slightly and avoiding direct eye contact with Asterion as he spoke respectfully and courteously. Upon receiving this news, Asterion knew that the plan to pressure the school council regarding Quirrell's attack had been successful. He imagined the scandal that would ensue if the information leaked that one of the students had been attacked by a Hogwarts professor. He could even imagine Rita Skeeter creating chaos with just those words. "Thank you, Flint." Showing a satisfied smile, Asterion thanked him and placed the glass of whiskey on the glass table. He stood up and left the Slytherin common room. The Hogwarts School Council chamber resembled a conventional courtroom, although devoid of the chairs intended for jurors and the audience. Asterion stood on a platform in the center of the hall, carefully observing the elevated table where 11 people were seated in chairs of ancient and noble appearance. There were 5 women and 6 men. Among them, one stood out, Albus Dumbledore, occupying the central chair. Of the other 4 female members, Asterion recognized only one. It was impossible to forget the woman who invited him to join a secret organization called R at his birthday party 3 years ago. Even now, as she stared at him, one of the most powerful men in England, he detected the same arrogance in her gaze, fully concealed beneath a serious and elegant demeanor. Honestly, Asterion couldn't understand where such confidence came from for someone to display such arrogance in front of him. "Thank you for coming so promptly, Heir Black," Dumbledore said with a gentle and warm smile directed at Asterion. "After much deliberation from this council, your request has been accepted. Congratulations, Heir Black. You have been accepted into the exorcism course. As an exorcist, I hope you maintain prudence in your judgments, justice in your heart, and the courage to face death with serenity," continued the Hogwarts headmaster, his blue eyes like a lake fixed on Asterion with a serious and encouraging gaze. The other council members nodded in agreement. The woman from the secret organization, Verixa Blackthorn Snide, spoke kindly, "I wish your career as an exorcist to be a success, Heir Black." Internally, Asterion scoffed at the apparent kindness expressed by the woman. One of the things he would never trust were secret organizations. You never know when they might stab someone in the back. At the same time, Asterion underestimated the extent of this secret organization's reach. It wasn't easy to become a member of the Hogwarts Council. Firstly, to attain such a position, one needed to be voted in at a Wisengamot meeting, garnering at least 20 votes for selection. Then, they would undergo a thorough investigation, during which their analytical SK*LLS and powers would be tested. Only after proving their abilities could someone become a member of the Hogwarts Council. Asterion refused to believe that this woman was innocent and had a clean past. But if his suspicions were correct, it would imply that the organization called R had deeply infiltrated the Ministry of Magic. He dared to say that even members of the Pureblood faction were involved in this. "It seems I'll have to do a thorough cleanup when I take control," Asterion thought, looking at the woman who was smiling kindly at him. He returned the gaze with a cold and indifferent stare. Asterion also glanced at the other members of the school council. The 5 remaining men were elderly, 3 elegantly dressed in expensive fine suits and 2 in suits that, although fine, were more discreet. 3 members were from noble houses and 2 were Muggleborns or half-bloods. Of the 5, 2 were powerful, Robert Crouch and Sebastian Fern, both powerful Grade 1 wizards. Robert Crouch, in particular, was a member of the famous Crouch House, a powerful family with significant connections within the Ministry of Magic. Sebastian was of Muggle origin and a rare Grade 1 wizard, something truly remarkable. Among the women, Asterion was only interested in 2. One of these women was Clarice Bones, a middle-aged woman, as her surname indicated, a member of the Bones House, probably with close ties to the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Amelia Bones. Asterion noticed that although Dumbledore did not control the school council, he had a lot of influence with Clarice, Sebastian, and other members of the council. Remembering that Dumbledore had said that these old folks didn't like to change things, Asterion scoffed. Obviously, it was a lie. The last interesting member of the school council was Verixa Blackthorn Snide, the woman who had close ties to a mysterious secret organization apparently very powerful. She was also the youngest member, under 40. "The papers regarding your mission will be delivered by the end of the day. I hope you have a great day, Heir Black," Dumbledore said, smiling. He looked at the other members of the council and asked, "Does any member of the council have anything to add?" Seeing that everyone remained silent, Dumbledore banged the gavel, closing the session of the Hogwarts School Council. Internally scoffing at the school council, Asterion left without looking back. Everything seemed like a tasteless joke. Author's thoughts: the mysterious Team Rocket organization is back. He, jokes aside, this will be a very important plot in this fanfic. Hope you enjoyed it. Chapter 61 Mission 1. In front of the mirror, Asterion adjusted his black tie as his eyes focused on Daphne sitting in an armchair in his room. Boys couldn't enter the girls' dormitory, but girls could enter the boys' dormitory. I also wanted to go with you on the mission, Daphne complained aloud, her voice filled with helplessness and annoyance. Asterion turned to look at her and replied calmly, you have to be at least a grade 1 witch to be my partner. I'm not far from that, at most in a year I'll achieve grade 1, Daphne murmured to herself, her eyes gradually regaining confidence. She stood up and approached Asterion. That outfit looks good on you, she said, fully helping Asterion with his tie. Asterion wore simple attire, a white long-sleeved shirt, a black tie, black pants, and black shoes. The shirt had the intricate M of the Ministry of Magic embroidered on the chest. This was the attire every wizard wore when they were on missions, accompanied by other accessories such as a watch, badge, and official documentation. The badges and official documentation were distributed and managed by Mi-0, they were real and even served for situations of emergency, allowing him to mobilize the army in case of catastrophes. The official badges were divided into 6 levels, the first level being the lowest and the 6th level being the highest. The higher your level, the more resources you could use in the normal world. At level 6, which was the level Asterion possessed, he could even mobilize the army with permission from the acting general at the time. Although only witches of special grade possessed such privileges. Assisting him with the final touches on his outfit, Daphne spoke with concern, return safely. Asterion looked at her and caressed her cheek with his thumb, his fingers sliding over her soft skin to her delicate lips slowly. Daphne felt her cheeks flush at the intimate gesture but didn't move, letting him do as he pleased. Thank you for your concern, he whispered, his voice gentle and grateful. Then, he leaned down and softly kissed her lips. Daphne wrapped her arms around his neck and surrendered to the kiss as Asterion's fingers dug into her slim waist. After a few minutes of kissing, they both parted and gazed into each other's eyes. Daphne leaned against his body, remaining silent, enjoying the serene yet pleasant atmosphere. It was the first time Asterion took the initiative to kiss her, and her heart overflowed with sweetness. She even felt like humming to express how happy she was in this moment. Although he didn't want to end this moment, Asterion spoke gently, I have to go, Daph. Just a little longer, she pleaded, burying her head into his chest, her voice sweet and filled with childishness, almost like a child adorably asking their parents for a toy. Asterion sighed and hugged her tighter, finding himself increasingly relaxed in Daphne's presence. After a while, Daphne reluctantly pulled away and looked at Asterion with a bright and loving gaze, like an enamored maiden. Seeing such a look, Asterion knew he had won the love of this pure-blood witch. For some reason, a feeling of satisfaction and the pleasure of conquest welled up in his heart. Men are so easy to please, feeling these emotions bubbling in his chest, Asterion murmured to himself. Taking one last look at Daphne, Asterion left the room. He felt that if he stayed any longer, he would likely give in to pleasure once again. Daphne, upon seeing Asterion leaving the room, jumped with excitement and threw herself onto his bed. No one truly understood the effort she had invested in this relationship. Her future husband was not someone easy to approach. Finally, after years of living together, she had managed to earn his initial trust. Now, all she needed was to strengthen that bond, and she would have a very satisfying married life. Inhaling the pleasant scent of the sheets and pillows, Daphne embraced the pillow and buried her face in it, letting out a joyful laugh. Completely different from the Ice Queen that everyone in Slytherin feared, at this moment, she was no different from a 13-year-old girl enjoying her crush. Asterion was completely oblivious to what was happening in his dormitory as he walked through a part of Hogwarts that remained off-limits to students before the 4th year. As he traversed the corridor, many young people hurried past him, all dressed identically regardless of gender, white long-sleeved shirt, tie, pants, and shoes. It was evident they were either heading out on missions assigned by the school or returning from them. What caught Asterion's attention the most was the absence of the relaxed and slightly childish atmosphere that younger students exuded. Among these older students, everyone seemed to carry serious or worried looks. It was clear to Asterion that the exorcism course was no joke, a simple mistake could result in fatal consequences. Continuing down the corridor, Asterion arrived at an imposing hall with an oval ceiling. Inside, hundreds of tables were occupied by students manipulating a myriad of documents, while lines of other students patiently waited. Paper airplanes cut through the air amidst owls carrying letters. Although the environment seemed chaotic at first glance, there was a strange quietness hanging over the place, broken only by the sound of stamps and occasional whispers. Walking up to one of the lines, Asterion waited patiently until it was finally his turn, which didn't take long as the students were very quick in processing the documents. Upon reaching the table, a 7th-year student greeted Asterion, but she didn't look up, focused on analyzing a document in her hands. "Badge number and mission details," she requested. Asterion retrieved the badge from his pocket and handed it to the young woman, along with a sheet containing the mission information. The badge displayed the symbols of the Ministry of Magic and MI0. Next to the M representing the Ministry of Magic was a wand, next to the M symbolizing MI0 was a sword. Below the two symbols, 6 stars indicated Asterion's level. Louise briefly lifted her gaze and found the badge. The next moment, her eyes widened as she observed the 6 stars shining particularly brightly on the badge. She took the paper containing the mission information and read it carefully. Mission: Investigation of the City of Nottingham. Location: England, Nottinghamshire, City of Nottingham. Acting on the mission: 1. Asterion Black, Special Grade, Badge Number, 002. Empty. Empty. Number of victims, 142. Mission conclusion: Investigation of Cursed Spirit of Special Grade. Upon successful identification, immediate execution order after confirmation of the Cursed Spirit. Louise took a deep breath and looked up, meeting red eyes, and didn't even need to glance at the badge to know that she was facing the 2nd Special Grade Wizard of England and the 32nd in the world. She took the badge offered by Asterion, checked the number on the mission information, and stamped the paper with a seal that read, "Pending." After that, she made a copy of the document and handed the original back to Asterion. Returning the badge to Asterion, she spoke calmly and politely, "Lord Black, please note that a Class 6 badge has privileges to bypass any queue. Your missions are important, so there's no need for you to wait and potentially delay mission fulfillment." Asterion nodded and pocketed the badge and the paper containing the mission information. "Thank you, milady," Asterion thanked and left. Louise watched his back and smiled. She hadn't expected to have the chance to stamp a special grade mission. "I'm going to make a personal copy for myself and put it in a picture frame. My sisters will be so jealous," Louise murmured to herself with an excited smile. Thoughts from the author: I enjoyed writing this chapter. In this fanfic, there will be many missions. You can create missions of your preference and send them to me. If I find them interesting, I'll include them in the fanfic along with credits to the author, Patreon members only. I hope you liked it. Laughing face. Chapter 63, Mission 2. England, Nottinghamshire, City of Nottingham. In the heart of Nottingham, a dark car glided smoothly to a stop in front of an imposing building, the MI0 branch in Nottingham. As the car parked, the door opened and Asterion, in the back seat, observed the middle-aged man with a slightly surprised expression. "I didn't expect to have you as my partner again, Edward," he remarked, noting the tired and indifferent expression of the man. Initially, the Ministry of Magic would send an experienced Auror to assist in the mission, but for Asterion, it seemed unnecessary. More people would only get in the way. However, the presence of an MI0 agent was crucial, not only for their familiarity with Muggle customs and laws but also for dealing with official matters involving police and military. Edward Grey, flicking cigarette ashes onto the ground, replied casually, "Believe me, I'm as surprised as you are. It seems the higher UPS thought it important for us to work together." "Familiarity always helps," Asterion agreed, approaching and extending his hand. "I hope we can work well together, Agent Grey." Edward shook his hand firmly, looking at Asterion with determination. "I hope the same, Agent Black." After the greeting, Edward got into the car, and they drove through the streets of Nottingham. Inside the car, Edward pulled out a clipboard with dozens of papers. "The first time we discovered this cursed spirit was 6 months ago. 2 children were already missing when field agents detected traces of negative magical energy in the area," Edward narrated as he looked at the paper containing reports from Hogwarts Auxiliary Course. "The next time the same negative residues were detected, 6 people disappeared. This was 6 blocks away from the first attack," he spoke, looking at Asterion with a serious gaze. Asterion also wore a serious look, not because of the power of the cursed spirit, but because of what it represented. A cursed spirit that has left its place of origin. It is commonly known that cursed spirits do not stray from the place of their origin, but in some rare cases, the cursed spirit may indeed move away from its place of origin. These cursed spirits were the most problematic, not only because they moved regularly but also because they rapidly grew in levels of power. They not only grew quickly but were also more intelligent, as much as a normal person. This type of cursed spirit had already surpassed primitive instincts and could think rationally. Fortunately, being as intelligent as a normal person does not equate to wisdom, so like normal serial killers, these cursed spirits had regular hunting grounds to satisfy their hunger, much like any territorial animal. What's the estimated hunting area? Asterion asked, furrowing his brow. About 50 to 60 km, Edward replied, looking at the information on the paper, his expression grim and cold. That area covers almost the entire city of Nottingham. Asterion murmured, taking in his words. Perhaps it's a special or semi-special grade cursed spirit. Report to the military and proceed with the evacuation of the entire city, Asterion declared after hearing the size of the hunting area, looking at Edward with a cold expression. Nottingham had about 300,000 inhabitants, and if a fight were to break out in the city, it would be a catastrophe for this historic city. Although it could also be a grade 1 cursed spirit, it was better to be cautious in case it was not just a simple grade 1 cursed spirit. Edward nodded and took his cell phone out of his pocket, dialing a specific 3-digit number 003. The call was accepted almost instantly. Supernatural Emergency Central. Red code for the city of Nottingham, Edward spoke with a heavy voice. For confirmation of your identity, please state your badge number. The male voice became serious. 145544, Edward replied. The badge number of the wizard on site, the voice asked again. 002, Asterion whispered, sitting next to Edward in the car. 002, Edward nodded to Asterion and responded. It took about 5 seconds for Edward to be responded to. Confirmation successful. Good luck, Agent Grey and Black. God bless Nottingham, the male voice replied, his voice serious and slightly nervous. May your prayers be answered, Central, Edward spoke calmly, certainly noticing the nervousness in the man's voice, but he didn't inquire further. It was quite obvious that the man had some relatives in Nottingham. Asterion heard everything and remained indifferent. As for haste, there was no need. Acting prematurely would only result in more chaos and deaths. He would refuse to act until the city was evacuated, or at least until the cursed spirit was successfully located. There was no rush to immediately find the cursed spirit. The city's evacuation alone would surely attract the curse's attention, making it opportune for it to reveal itself. After all, you don't let your prey escape. Meanwhile, a curtain of darkness emerged above Asterion's palm, from which a grotesque eye emerged, surrounded by tentacles. The cursed spirit didn't need orders to know its role. Transformed into multiple versions of itself, the eye multiplied and flew throughout Nottingham. I've sent my cursed spirits to patrol the city. With this, I can monitor all of Nottingham in real time. When he shows up, I'll know, murmured Asterion to Edward beside him. The MI0 agent nodded, and both waited in silence. They knew the evacuation would take hours. Tension hung in the air as they watched the city slowly empty out. Edward glanced at the clock on the car's dashboard and then at Asterion. How much longer until the evacuation is complete? Upon hearing this, Asterion looked down upon the entire city through the cursed spirits in the form of eyes. He pondered for a moment before responding, at least another 2 hours, perhaps more, depending on the efficiency of the evacuation teams. Edward nodded, his expression calm and serious. Every passing minute increased the risk of more victims falling into the clutches of the cursed spirit. Meanwhile, Asterion's shadow eyes continued to watch over the city, searching for any sign of the cursed spirit. With each passing second, he could sense the negative energy rising at an extremely rapid pace. Asterion knew that the evacuation had left people fearful, nervous, and filled with anger, emotions highly conducive to times of high stress. At the same time, all this negative magical energy was writhing and heading towards a specific location. It seemed that the cursed spirit had noticed the drastic change in the city's environment. Finally, after an agonizing wait, one of Asterion's shadow eyes detected suspicious activity in a residential area south of the city. Residential area south of the city. Asterion murmured, his voice laden with a cold intent to K*LL. Edward nodded and took out his cell phone from his pocket. Central, it's in the south of the city. Affirmative, Agent Grey. I'll be reporting to the general in charge of the evacuation operation, the male voice responded immediately. The car's driver quickly headed south towards the city of Nottingham. Author's thoughts: the first mission will be a little different than expected, as it is a cursed spirit that can move from its original location. Chapter 63, Mission 3. As the car swiftly traversed the empty streets, Asterion inside the car showed a cold smile. Through the eyes of darkness, he had successfully located the cursed spirit. Without caring about the surprised looks from Edward and the driver, he opened the car door and, regardless of the high speed, leaped from the car. In midair, Asterion summoned a kind of huge manta ray and landed on it at high speed. The manta ray flew towards the sky, leaving a white trail behind. A minute later, above the residential area, the black air looked at the humanoid cursed spirit with a cold gaze. It stood about 2 meters tall, with grey skin with white stripes. On both shoulders, it had what looked like chimneys exhaling large amounts of smoke. Its oval head had terrifying and ugly features, and it possessed particularly dark claws, resembling weapon holes. He confirmed, it was a special grade cursed spirit. "I found you, filthy insect," Asterion spoke, smiling coldly. "Are you ready to be enslaved forever?" "Ooha!" The spirit let out a strange cry, as if responding to Asterion. Asterion understood what it was saying through the negative magical energy, though it was more emotion than words. In the next moment, the sound of a whistle similar to that of a steam train echoed throughout the city before a pillar of highly compressed smoke erupted. Anger and fury with some traces of hatred, Asterion murmured, causing the manta ray beneath him to fly upside down, swiftly dodging the smoke. The attack, which missed Asterion, continued to wreak havoc, sending dust and debris flying. When the dust settled, Asterion looked at the ravine, a kilometer long and 50 meters wide, with a calm gaze. "Ha-ha-ha-ha-ha." The special grade cursed spirit seemed to be laughing, a cruel and sadistic laughter. "You are too proud, insect," Asterion spoke calmly, then disappeared from where he was. Asterion reappeared suddenly in front of the cursed spirit, his hand gripping the head of the curse. The black air smiled coldly and forcefully slammed the cursed spirit's head onto the cold asphalt with shocking force, creating a crater the moment it collided with the street. The cursed spirit still seemed in shock at what had occurred, lying with arms outstretched, looking up at Asterion clad in his armor and gauntlets. "The game is not over yet, let's play a little more, filthy insect," he said coldly, reinforcing his body with magical energy. Asterion raised his foot and kicked with all his might at the head of the special grade curse. Boom! The entire area within 100 meters sank with the force, sending dust and debris from houses and asphalt flying into the air. The massive tremor reverberated throughout the city, shaking buildings within dozens of kilometers from the epicenter of the attack. In the air, swiftly dodging the high-speed smoke, Asterion floated upside down, looking down at the cursed spirit with a cold and calm gaze. "Ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-way!" Half of the cursed spirit's head was empty, the entire grey brain could be seen grotesquely contracting, but the entire wound regenerated the next instant. The cursed spirit looked up at Asterion in the air and brought its hands together as if holding a ball. A large amount of negative magical energy gathered into a large ball of dark blue energy. Then, the cursed spirit threw it at him. Asterion remained indifferent, forming a seal with his hands. "Baskerville!" With a sadistic laugh, the head of a huge demonic dog manifested on Asterion's shoulder. The 100 red eyes stared at the cursed spirit with a hungry gaze and opened its mouth, swallowing the ball of negative magical energy. Asterion could have dodged the attack, but if that attack hit the city, half of Nottingham would no longer exist. Drawing his wand, Asterion flicked his wrist and chanted the spell. Maxima Bombarda. From the tip of Asterion's wand, a scarlet glow blossomed, and in the next moment, a massive colorless explosion soared into the sky. The entire residential area in the south of Nottingham vanished before Asterion's spell. Looking at the huge, empty and deep crater, Asterion floated in the air and looked at the cursed spirit, or at least what was left of it, a pair of feet. Not leaving any chance for the cursed spirit to regenerate, Asterion raised his hand, ready to exorcise it. Flush! As he was about to exorcise, a high-speed fragment violently tore through the air towards Asterion. The black air didn't move to dodge. Baskerville appeared and faithfully protected his master, manifesting behind him. Its huge body rose behind Asterion as it growled furiously at the man who attacked its master. Looking to the side, Asterion saw a man approaching calmly with a gentle smile. He wore a black suit, his features suggesting Middle Eastern origin. He was about 40 and appeared to be in good shape. Asterion tried to recall the special grade wizards from that region and found 3, 2 women, and 1 man. Seeing a man in front of him, Asterion presumed he was facing Mustafa al-Husseini, a relatively new special grade wizard. Lord al-Husseini? Asterion asked coldly. Perhaps, perhaps not, the man replied with a relaxed smile, his perfect English almost native-like, even carrying a hint of an English accent. Asterion confirmed that the person before him was not Mustafa, but someone else using his appearance, or in the worst case, his body. As Asterion focused on the mysterious man, the cursed spirit had just regenerated and stood beside the man. Asterion was puzzled. Humans and cursed spirits were incompatible. It was in the instinct of every cursed spirit to kill and devour. But the scene before him shattered all the logic that this world had maintained for millennia. "I'll exorcise the cursed spirit and then arrest you, maybe dissect you," Asterion spoke coldly, looking at the man with an indifferent gaze. The man just shrugged and continued to look at Asterion with an amused gaze. "I must say, you really resemble Corvinus, even have the same hobby of dissecting people," he said with a playful smile on his lips, his black eyes almost nostalgic as they looked at him. This time it was Asterion's turn to be surprised. By the man's words, he had known his ancestor, but the man had been dead for over 1,000 years. This meant that the man before him was at least 1,000 years old. Of course, all of this assumed that what the man said was true. "Sorry, I'm more handsome than my ancestor," Asterion replied sarcastically. He looked at the man. "But don't worry, as a good host, I must invite you to spend some time at my mansion." The man looked at Asterion with a playful gaze, almost nostalgic. "I must say, even your sarcasm and narcissism are similar. If I didn't believe that reincarnation doesn't exist, I would believe that you are the reincarnation of Corvinus Black," the man said, casually spreading his arms. He looked at Asterion with increasing interest. Chapter 64, Mission 4. "As you said yourself, let's play a little," he said with a gentle and relaxed tone. As soon as the man finished speaking, a black veil covered the entire city of Nottingham almost instantly. For the first time, Asterion showed a dignified look. He could do something similar, but not at such a frightening speed. This only showed that the opponent's mastery over barriers was extraordinary. But showing seriousness towards the enemy did not mean that Asterion was afraid of the man standing in front of him. "Play? Yes, let's play," Asterion spoke sarcastically, forming a seal with his hand. 11 gigantic whirlpools made of the purest darkness manifested above him in an instant. The massive amount of negative magical energy soared to terrifying levels, to the point where it was already affecting the world, making the environment within the veil even darker and more obscure. As long as one was on the island of Great Britain, the summoning of the 11 cursed spirits was felt by any wizard of grade 1 and above. Almost like a beacon in the dark night. The entire Ministry of Magic was thrown into chaos by the alarm, showing the emergency of the situation. Asterion expended a huge amount of magical energy to summon 11 special grade cursed spirits. Looking at the pairs of red eyes through each whirlpool of pure darkness, the man spoke with sincere admiration. 11 special grade cursed spirits, add that to your pet dog, 12. I must say, besides Corvinus, none of your ancestors could maintain 12 special grade cursed spirits. I'm curious, are you also following Corvinus's plan? The mysterious man asked curiously, seeming not to care about the 12 special grade cursed spirits above him, as if he didn't care about the danger he was currently in. Asterion tensed upon hearing this, unable to help but look at the man with a shocked expression. As if seeing the shocked look on his face, the man spoke gently. Don't be surprised, I was the one who gave the idea to Corvinus, he just perfected it. He continued speaking, unfazed by the surprised look on Asterion's face. Do you know the reason for Corvinus's monstrous hatred against the cursed spirits? Believe me when I say it's not just because of racial differences. Corvinus had a twin sister. Unfortunately, she was killed by a cursed spirit when the poor girl awakened her magic. Corvinus witnessed his sister's death and awakened his innate technique. He unconsciously used his sister's soul and turned it into a cursed spirit. The cursed spirit was powerful, perhaps the most powerful I've witnessed in the 2,000 years I've walked this world. Unfortunately, he hid the cursed spirit well, as I never saw her again. The man spoke with a disappointed look, looking at Asterion. Asterion couldn't help but think of the statue at the entrance of Black Manor. Could it be Corvinus Black's twin sister? But, in the Book of Heritage, Corvinus only mentioned that it was an extremely powerful cursed spirit, so powerful that the Black ancestor died shortly after sealing the cursed spirit in the statue. Because of the hatred he felt at that moment, he always sought to eliminate all cursed spirits from the world, an ideal to cleanse this dirty and corrupt world. Corvinus was not the first to think like that, but he was the craziest, as he tried to do what I theorized to be impossible. The man showed a smile, as if remembering something interesting. You don't need to tell me if you are trying to achieve this goal successfully, I can see it in your eyes. You have the same hatred and will as Corvinus, I really want to see if you will be able to achieve Corvinus Black's ideal. He spoke gently as he looked at Asterion, his gaze full of excitement and a touch of madness. I think we talked too much, let's get to the point, shall we? He smiled and elegantly bowed. When the man finished speaking, a crimson shadow surged towards him at a frightening speed. The man jumped into the air, grabbing the shoulder of the cursed spirit representing the pollution of the world, avoiding Nidhogg's enormous mouth. An interesting curse, Asterion. The man spoke, observing with interest the enormous body of Nidhogg. Did you use the body of a basilisk as the main idea or an eastern dragon? Asterion just coldly huffed and remained silent, feeling like things were slipping out of his control. The mysterious man using the body of another special grade wizard was too calm even surrounded by 12 special grade cursed spirits. It was as if he could escape at any moment. But even if he lost all the information the man possessed, Asterion was determined to KL both the special grade curse and the mysterious man. Forming another seal, Asterion murmured. Messer the Madamus. From another vortex of pure darkness, another figure emerged, resembling a gigantic sheep with bright blue eyes, but instead of wool covering the animal's body, it was 10,000 diamonds. Asterion felt the magic from his body being drained relatively quickly, he estimated it could supply the magical energy of 3 special grade cursed spirits for a few hours. As the mysterious man looked confused at the enormous sheep covered in diamonds, his face drastically changed upon seeing a colossal cloud of sparkling particles approaching from all directions at an alarming speed. The man didn't hesitate, he threw the special grade cursed spirit in his hand and used it as a shield while quickly drawing a wand. Pointing it towards the cloud of tiny diamonds that seemed to penetrate everything, the man murmured in Greek. Alpha Lambda Lambda Alpha Gamma. Note, means change in Greek. When he chanted the spell in Greek, a field of energy manifested around him. As tens of millions of tiny diamonds collided with the force field, they transformed into feathers, gently brushing against the man. As the man was about to exit the force field, massive crimson bolts bathed the ground in pure destruction and ruin. Looking up, he saw the enormous six-eyed, two-mouthed eastern dragon manipulating an infinite amount of lightning bolts. Damn it, Corvinus, Salazar, your descendant is an interesting one, the man cursed, though there was a playful smile on his lips. Suddenly, the man's face changed upon seeing both of Asterion's hands coming together to form a very special seal. Asterion joined both thumbs, index fingers, and pinkies, forming a seal very similar to the one Sukuna used when activating his domain expansion. Looking coldly, Asterion sarcastically smiled. He knew that Adamus and Nidhogg's attack couldn't KL the man, but it could delay him enough for Asterion to finish casting the ultimate technique of an inborn technique. Asterion murmured calmly. Domain Expansion, Dark Side of the Primordial Universe. Chapter 65, Mission 5. Throughout 2 millennia in which he wandered this world, Herpo understood an unwavering truth: in the face of the omnipotence and omniscience of magic, the fragility of the human body was undeniable. On his quest for truth, he witnessed the devastating power of magic, capable of reducing physical existence to nothing. Confronted with a special grade sorcerer's domain expansion, a force so brutal it disfigured reality, tearing apart the very fabric of reality, he knew, with a cold and cruel certainty, that in the face of such power, even the most resilient of bodies would be erased from existence itself. However, Herpo, forged in the wisdom of 2 millennia, recognized a truth: only a domain expansion could oppose another. With the imminent danger looming over him, he reacted as quickly as a mere blink of an eye, discarding without hesitation the threats of the cursed spirits that surrounded him, his total attention and being focused on Asterion. Forming a seal with his hands, he murmured calmly. Domain Expansion Workshop of the God of Creation. Domain Expansion Dark Side of the Primordial Universe. Both, unwavering, unflinching, materialized their innate techniques, their souls laying bare within the barriers forming around both of them. Asterion's expansion emerged as a dark vortex, an abyssal expanse cold and lifeless, swallowing all the malice and sins accumulated by humanity, a pit of all conceivable evil. In parallel, Herpo's expansion unfolded like a desolate desert, under a sky dominated by titanic gears, spinning tirelessly in a mechanical symphony, a clock marking the end of times. And then, like 2 ancient gods in battle, their domains collided, a dark universe against a desert, the primordial darkness against a clock of the end times. In an instant, no longer than a blink of an eye, a mere millisecond, a blinding glow marked the clash of worlds. And, despite the chaos, both Asterion and Herpo felt a profound tremor, a dizzying sensation that the heavens and the earth were inverting under the overwhelming impact. Yet, both stood immovable as mountains in the face of the magical fury that was the collision between two domain expansions. They persisted, their domains continuing to collide, a dance of destruction and creation. Suddenly, everything disintegrated, the walls of Asterion's domain expansion broke. With no more impediments, Harpo's domain expansion advanced. But before it could touch Asterion, a huge serpent with two silver heads emerged from the space. With grace and beauty, it appeared and swallowed Asterion, then emerged back into space. Looking out over the vast, lifeless desert, for the first time in many centuries, Herpo was confused. He was about to envelop Asterion with the domain expansion, then, by Zeus, how had he disappeared? Upon dispelling his own expansion, an insatiable curiosity made him look up towards the sky. And there, in the depths of the sky darkened by the veil, an unusual sight surprised him, bringing a smile to his lips: a huge two-headed serpent. In one of the serpent's mouths, was Asterion. Space. Herpo murmured, looking at the cursed spirit in the form of a two-headed serpent. Seated in the jaw of Almisa Mercury, the dimension-devouring serpent, Asterion cast a cold glance at the mysterious man. He never expected that in such a short span of time, the man would be capable of executing a domain expansion. What he despised the most was losing in a competition of domain expansions, revealing an abysmal gap in experience and technique between him and the mysterious man. I must confess, it has been ages since I resorted to my own domain expansion. The man's voice resonated, joyful and carefree. His eyes sparkled as he fixed Asterion in the skies, as if witnessing something extraordinary. He continued speaking, his voice tinged with sincere admiration. I thought your domain expansion would be similar to that of Corvinus, who creates a sea of colossal monsters, but unexpectedly, you used negative magical energy as a base and created a domain expansion focused on negative emotions. Any other mage would have gone mad if they fell into your domain expansion. Honestly, you are a genius, Asterion. Glancing suddenly towards the north, Herpo showed a look of disappointment and spoke, looking towards Asterion in the sky. Unfortunately, we have company. I hope to meet another time for a cup of tea. Taking what was left of the cursed spirit that represented the pollution of the world, Herpo apparat away. Asterion did not stop him, he did not have enough magical energy at the moment. He had to re-evaluate the consumption of their summonings and domain expansions, both of which used up vast amounts of magical energy. As Asterion analyzed the combat, reflecting on the mistakes made, the veil that shrouded Nottingham dissipated, and the temperature in the region experienced an abrupt increase. Turning his gaze towards the arrival of the man, Asterion spotted Albus Dumbledore, enveloped in white flames. Even from that distance, it was possible to feel the searing heat emanating from the flaming white flames that surrounded the man. Dumbledore looked at a third of the city destroyed and focused his gaze on Asterion, in the mouth of a two-headed serpent. He appeared instantly in the same mouth of the serpent where Asterion was, looked at the 13-year-old boy with a serious gaze, and asked, "What in the name of Merlin happened in this city?" Asterion did not hesitate to respond. At this moment, given the current concerns, they were not enemies. I was about to exorcise a special grade curse when I was attacked by a man I presumed to be Mustafa al-Husseini, but it wasn't him, it was someone using his appearance, or his body. We fought, and I lost. By his words, he knew my ancestor Corvinus, though I do not know if his words were true. Dumbledore remained silent for a brief moment, before responding in a cold tone, "I will communicate with Israel personally. If it is confirmed that Lord al-Husseini attacked, we will declare war." Asterion looked at Dumbledore surprised, but was relieved. Anyone would be furious with their home attacked. "If you need my presence to press Israel, you can call me." Asterion spoke before gathering all his cursed spirits and apparating away. Looking at the destruction in the city, Dumbledore knelt down to the ground level and looked at the remnants of magical energy. His face turned grim observing the familiar magical particles in his hands. "Horcrux," Dumbledore murmured, feeling the same dark magic he once sensed in Voldemort. Author's thoughts, making Asterion lose left a bitter taste in my mouth, but it was necessary. A 13-year-old boy winning against a wizard over 2,000 years old was too unrealistic. If anyone is wondering how Herpo has survived for over 2,000 years, he is my version of Kenjaku. Before his current body dies, he K*LLS another wizard and takes over their body using a Horcrux. As the creator of the Horcrux, I felt it was quite fitting for a villain. Let me know what you think, your comments help me a lot. Laughing face. Chapter 66, Aftermath of the Attack, 1. Great Britain, England. Hogwarts. Rose left the Gryffindor girls' dormitory and walked through the long corridors, holding in her arms a book titled Potter Legacy, which Hagrid had given her the first time they met, back at the Dursleys' house. The book documented the experiences of all the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Potter house over the centuries. It was comforting for her to read the thoughts of her ancestors. Even being the last remaining member of the Potter house, she felt that they still cared for her, even after death. Especially her father's notes, which she made a point of reading every night before sleep, were a way to connect with him, despite his absence. It was a relief to discover, through the book, that her parents were not as her aunt had described. They were not addicts who abandoned her and died in a car accident. As she walked through the corridors, Rose noticed that many students displayed tense expressions, as if a significant event were taking place. Quickening her pace, she reached the dining hall and sat next to Hermione, who also looked equally tense and worried. "What happened?" asked Rose, her intense and expressive blue eyes fixed on her best friend. "Maybe a war," replied Hermione, her voice laden with tension. "War? I slept just one night and we're already on the brink of war?" Confused, Rose stared at Hermione, searching for explanations. Realizing Rose's confusion, Hermione handed her the newspaper. Rose then looked at the newspaper in her hands and noticed the headline featured on the front page. "Devastation in Nottingham after clash between special grade wizards." Rose's eyes widened as she read the words below the title. In a catastrophic episode that occurred this Wednesday, the city of Nottingham, located in Nottinghamshire, suffered nearly total damage during a violent confrontation between two special grade wizards. The incident, which started as an exorcism mission, quickly escalated into a battle of disastrous proportions, involving Asterion Black, a renowned British wizard, and Mustafa al-Husseini, a newly recognized Israeli wizard. The intense fight between these two powerful figures left a trail of destruction across the city, resulting in nearly 100,000 people homeless, thousands of residents suffering various injuries, and tragically, hundreds lost their lives in the ensuing chaos. The international wizarding community and MI0 in general are alarmed by the level of destruction and the humanitarian consequences of the clash. Local authorities and relief organizations are already mobilized to assist those affected, and discussions on measures to prevent such incidents in the future have already started to take shape in various committees in several countries around the world. This tragic event highlights the urgent need for stricter regulations and more effective control over magical duels, especially when they involve wizards of such high caliber. The ramifications of this disaster are still being assessed, but it is already clear that Nottingham will have a long road ahead in its journey of reconstruction and recovery. Rose just widened her eyes and read everything with a shocked look on her face. How on earth did something so drastic happen in just one night? "Read further down," Hermione murmured to Rose. "There's more?" Rose followed Hermione's words and held her breath as she saw the title. "Albus Dumbledore demands action from the Israeli magical government after Nottingham tragedy." In the wake of the devastating events that shook Nottingham, Albus Dumbledore, considered the most powerful wizard in the world, made an urgent visit to the Israeli Ministry of Magic. The visit aimed primarily to press for an official response and concrete measures regarding the attack perpetrated by Mustafa al-Husseini, an Israeli high-level wizard, in the heart of England. Dumbledore, a figure of prominent respect and influence in the global magical community, expressed deep concern over the consequences of the clash and the need for stricter management of magical activities that may impact public safety and international relations. Rose quickly flipped to the next page of the newspaper. Tensions escalate following the Israeli magical government's response to the Nottingham incident. The recent meeting between Albus Dumbledore and the Israeli Ministry of Magic did not achieve the expected outcome, intensifying international tensions within the magical community. The Israeli magical government stood firm in its position of not recognizing that the devastating attack in Nottingham was orchestrated by Mustafa al-Husseini, one of their special grade wizards. Dumbledore, known for his diplomacy and wisdom, refused to accept this response, raising concerns that a potential international magical confrontation may be approaching. The firm refusal of the Israeli Ministry of Magic to admit Husseini's responsibility has raised questions about implications for global security and stability among magical nations. Damn it! After finishing reading, Rose couldn't help but curse out loud. Clutching her hair, Rose groaned in frustration. She still didn't understand how things could escalate so quickly and so dramatically. "What are you going to do, Rose?" Hermione asked, with a clearly worried expression. "I can't do anything to mediate my own. If I go to Israel, they might see it as a threat from England." 1 high-level wizard means negotiation, 2 special grade wizards mean war. Rose said, visibly discouraged. As she mentioned, Israel would only see hostility if she arrived to mediate between the two nations. Mustafa, when I find you, I'm going to punch you so hard your mother probably won't recognize you when she sees your face after our fight. Rose muttered, her fists clenched and a frosty smile on her face. Let's go. Rose stood up. Where to? Hermione followed her friend and stood up as well. To Professor McGonagall, she must know more about the incident. Rose replied, walking out of the dining hall. Hermione quickly ate her toast and followed Rose with the toast still in her mouth. Author's thoughts, Mustafa was inspired by Ishmael from The Wheel of Time. I loved the actor's performance and made him one of my villains. Regarding the subject of Israel, I don't intend to offend anyone's religion or incite hatred. I hope you understand. Chapter 67, Aftermath of the Attack, 2. In Professor McGonagall's office. Minerva was behind a desk, busy with a pile of papers on the table. Every time she reviewed a document and stamped it, she whispered. Damn you, Albus Dumbledore, you left and saddled me with this cursed pile of papers to authorize. Minerva found she would rather fight a team of trolls than battle these damned papers. If Albus ever asked her to take over as head of Hogwarts, she would refuse without a second thought. This job was inhumane, the amount of work was not worth the reward. Besides, the salary was far too low. As Minerva grumbled through each report, the door to her office was opened without warning. Frowning in displeasure, she watched her 2 favorite students enter her office, both bearing different expressions, one worried and the other visibly angrier. Had it been any other student, she would have scolded them, even punished them severely for entering her office without knocking, but she had a deep affection for these 2 girls, so she remained silent, yet with a stern expression. Miss Granger, Miss Potter, a lady should not invade someone's personal space in such a manner. She spoke, her voice stern and cold, causing both girls to display embarrassed smiles. I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall. As an A-grade student beloved by all teachers, Hermione was the first to apologize. Rose, on the other hand, just shrugged and sat down in the chair opposite the desk. Sorry for coming in without knocking, she said, ignoring Hermione's silent disapproving looks. Seeing this, Minerva just shook her head and sighed. What brings you to my office, ladies? She asked, leaning back in her chair. Are we going to war with Israel? Rose directly asked her question. Unlikely. Without any hesitation, Minerva answered Rose's question. War isn't good for anyone, whether for us or for Israel. Especially with the vultures watching the entire situation, waiting for a good moment to reap the benefits. The newspaper. Before Hermione could finish speaking, Minerva interrupted her. Miss Granger, Minerva looked at her favorite student and spoke calmly. Do not believe everything you read in the newspaper, they dramatize facts to sell more copies regardless of how much chaos and fear they would cause in the country. They are a bunch even greedier than goblins. The current situation is not as tense as it seems, Minerva continued. Israel and England have not gone to war at this time. Minerva's calm and stern words soothed the tense and nervous mind of the brown-haired girl. Asterion was attacked. Will Hogwarts reinforce its defenses in case of an attack? Rose, who had been silent listening to their conversation, spoke at this moment. Minerva adjusted her glasses, which had slipped slightly, and replied with a touch of pride in her voice. Miss Potter, you need not worry about that. Hogwarts is one of the most magically secure places in the known world. Should Hogwarts be attacked, we don't need to reinforce our defenses, the attackers will need to reinforce their attack. Honestly, Minerva wasn't exaggerating in the slightest. Hogwarts was built above one of the world's ley lines, and the magic drawn from the ley line fueled Hogwarts' defenses at all times with nearly infinite magical energy, especially the enormous barrier that covered the entire castle, protecting it from all directions, including from below the ground. However, there was something that made Minerva tense and cautious. That was Voldemort, possessing the body of Quirinus. Yes, Hogwarts was impregnable from the outside, but every defense had a weakness, and Hogwarts' defenses were no different in this regard. If the extraction of magical energy from the ley lines were to be interrupted, Hogwarts would be defenseless against attacks from high-grade wizards. Fortunately, the core of Hogwarts was even more strictly protected than the castle itself. Only the head of Hogwarts could enter the core without being killed by the magical defenses of the core. Rose was surprised. It was the first time she saw arrogance in the stern Professor McGonagall, which certainly took her aback, but she chose to trust in this enormous magical castle, though she still noted the concern the professor tried to hide. Hermione and Rose nodded, relieved by her words, or at least that was how Minerva felt, and both left the office feeling lighter. In the corridor. Do you think she lied? Walking alongside Rose, Hermione whispered to her friend with a worried look. Her heart raced when she talked about war. Rose replied, looking ahead. She's hiding something, worried about something, especially after Professor Quirinus disappeared. Rose didn't tell Hermione that Quirinus was possessed by Voldemort. It was a piece of news she would hide if possible. Nobody needed to know that Voldemort had returned. She would find him, ll him, and the man would remain dead once and for all. Hermione looked at her friend with suspicion. She too saw that Professor McGonagall was worried about something and had withheld a lot of information, similar to Rose, who spoke in a very cold, almost murderous tone when it came to Professor Quirinus, who had disappeared a few days ago. Whether it was Professor McGonagall or Rose, both were hiding things from her, which made her sad and at the same time angry. She would find out what both were hiding. Austria, Austrian Alps near Mengard. In Grindelwald's personal chamber. The Dark Lord dressed in the finest clothes he owned and displayed a satisfied smile on his aged face, his ethereal blue eyes glowing with a phosphorescent light. Is everything ready, Aurelius? Grindelwald asked, adjusting his tie. Yes, my lord. Aurelius nodded and replied. Everyone is ready to depart at any moment. And the Aurora Society? Grindelwald continued to inquire. Those occultists are nearly salivating at the idea of attacking Hogwarts and *ling the child. Aurelius did not hide his disdain when he mentioned the group of lunatics. I still don't understand why they want to *ll the girl. The child is innocent. He spoke, his tone cold. The world is cruel, Aurelius. It doesn't care who dies or who survives. Grindelwald turned to look at his adoptive son and continued. The birth of that child disrupted the world's balance. The number of cursed spirits appearing around the world has increased by nearly 50% since Rose Potter was born. The birth of Rose Potter was a sin in the eyes of that lunatic cult claiming to be the balance of the wizarding world's order. Grindelwald couldn't help but mock the Aurora Society, especially its purpose. When we accomplish our purpose, may I *ll them all? Aurelius asked, his voice cold and deadly. Around his body, the shadow of a deformed stag made from swirls of darkness manifested. Grindelwald was unbothered and spoke kindly. You may enjoy yourself as much as you like after we are finished, Aurelius. Placing his hand on the mirror, Grindelwald saw the young Dumbledore appear beside him, hand on his shoulder. As promised, Albus. I'm wearing my finest suit so we can finally *ll each other. He murmured, looking at Dumbledore's reflection, who also smiled gently. Chapter 68, Invasion of Hogwarts, 1. Austria, Austrian Alps near Mengard. A man clad in a black robe and hood, also wearing a silver mask, approached another man by the window. Archbishop, greeted the newcomer respectfully. Unlike the man in black, the Archbishop was dressed in a red robe and wore a golden mask, indicating his high status within the Aurora Society. Any problems, Father? Asked the Archbishop, without turning his gaze away from the snowy mountains beyond the window. His voice was muffled by the mask, yet it was still possible to discern the masculine tone. Our lambs are ready to depart, Archbishop, replied the man identified as Father, maintaining a respectful tone. Very well, today our Lord shall bathe in the blood of the wicked, declared the Archbishop with a calm that barely disguised the excitement hidden behind the icy mask. Yes, Archbishop, responded the man in black, his voice brimming with excitement and reverence. Grindelwald descended the stairs and found all his acolytes standing, respectfully awaiting him. They were dressed in black robes adorned with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows embroidered on their chests with pride. There was no need for them to hide their faces. To them, they were heroes not yet recognized by the world. With a satisfied glance over his followers, Grindelwald turned his attention to the army beside the acolytes, hundreds of zealots dressed in black robes and hoods, their identities hidden by black and silver masks, a look reminiscent of the inquisitors of the Middle Ages. At the forefront of the zealots stood a particularly striking man, dressed in red priestly robes and a golden mask. Grindelwald recognized him as a special grade wizard. As for his true identity and the magical signature he was sensing, Grindelwald had no idea. He had never seen the Red Archbishop of the Aurora Society before. It was also possible that this man had managed to deceive his senses with an alchemical item or an innate technique. Grindelwald then shifted his focus to the third special grade wizard involved in this attack. He was a man of Middle Eastern features, dressed in an elegant black suit and with a meticulously groomed beard. This was Mustafa al-Husseini, the wizard who had attacked Nottingham the previous day and fought with the young Asterian. Despite the gentle smile that Mustafa displayed, Grindelwald merely scoffed inwardly at that smile. Having known the young Mustafa before, he knew him to be an honorable man, devoutly pious to his god. The man before him, however, was not the true Mustafa al-Husseini, but rather an ancient monstrous creature using his body. Note: Mustafa was based on Ishmael from The Wheel of Time. I simply loved the man's performance in the series. Faced with the situation, Grindelwald remained indifferent towards the man and positioned himself in front of the three groups, displaying a serene expression. "Let us begin," he said simply. In response, his acolytes began rhythmically beating on their chests, creating a melody that sounded serious and sacred. "Yes, my master." Without hesitation, Grindelwald operated, immediately followed by all his acolytes. "May our Lord bless this holy crusade," declared the priest in the red robe to his followers, before operating himself, chasing after Grindelwald. The other members of the Society of Dawn responded in unison, their voices filled with excitement and fanatical reverence. "Our Lord will bless our holy crusade." Soon after, they all operated, following their leader into the glorious battle they anticipated. Left alone in Nurmengard, Herpo merely shrugged and murmured, "The youth today are too hasty." He smiled and operated away. Indeed, things were getting very interesting. Hogwarts. Rose leaned against the window with the Potter family heirloom book in her hands. She was reading, more specifically, about the domain expansion section. She didn't find the supreme technique of innate witchcraft difficult. It involved raising barriers around and manifesting the innate technique within the barrier, simple as that. Although it consumed a lot of magical energy for others, this wasn't a problem for her, who could virtually have infinite magical energy. The only problem is with merging blue and red. It's almost like creating a black hole in space in an instant. The amount of calculations for that is insane, even for me, Rose murmured to herself, turning the page of the book. Merging blue and red was something Rose theorized after her studies and calculations. Theoretically, it was possible, but the amount of information she would have to process was insane even for her. The worst part was that she had to perform all these calculations within a millisecond. Any longer, and everything would explode in a massive burst. "I guess I know why my ancestors didn't want to innovate. Manipulating space is tricky, even with the help of magic that distorts reality, it's quite complicated." She continued to murmur, focusing on the words on the pages. Suddenly, Rose heard Hermione's voice from afar. "Rose! I finally found you." Looking down the corridor, she saw her friend approaching, holding a book. Reaching Rose in less than a second, Hermione started scolding her friend without any hesitation. "I told you we have history of magic class, you can't just skip lessons." Rose just pretended to listen while nodding her head seriously at Hermione. However, a massive tremor caused Hermione to lose her balance and fall into Rose's arms. What was that? An earthquake? Getting out of her friend's arms, Hermione grumbled. Suddenly, she noticed Rose's dignified face looking up at the sky through the window. Following her friend's gaze, Hermione approached the window and looked up. Then, her eyes widened in pure horror. Outside Hogwarts, a huge blue barrier covered the entire castle. Above the barrier, 3 gigantic pillars of light descended from the sky and collided with the barrier. The barrier remained intact without any ripple or even a sign of breaking. Heretics are really creative. On top of a hill not too far from Hogwarts, the Red Archbishop spoke coldly. Behind him, hundreds of fanatics ready to attack at any moment. It's impossible to destroy the Hogwarts barrier by attacking from the front. Next to the man, Herpo spoke, looking at the blue barrier with veiled admiration on his face. Rowena and Helga are 2 impressive women, both masters in barrier formations. What do we do? Herpo smiled and looked at the Archbishop with a gentle gaze. Grindelwald also looked at the man in red. We wait for our friend inside Hogwarts. The Archbishop spoke coldly, staring at the enormous blue barrier protecting the majestic castle atop the hill. Author's thoughts, let the games begin. Chapter 69, Invasion of Hogwarts, 2. Hogwarts. A sudden tremor ran through the corridors of Hogwarts, making the ground shake under the feet of all the students. In the midst of the confusion, the unmistakable voice of Professor McGonagall echoed, firm and clear, throughout the school. "Attention, students, she began, her voice cutting through the air with palpable calm and strength. Hogwarts is under attack by unknown dark wizards. All students from the 4th year and above should prepare for any possible emergencies. Be ready to fight at any moment. Students from the 1st to the 3rd year should immediately head to the safety of their dormitories. Do not give in to fear. Stay alert and serene. Remember, you are wizards and witches of Hogwarts, trained to face even the darkest shadows. The Ministry of Magic has been notified, and reinforcements are on their way. We will hold our Hogwarts until they arrive. United, we are invincible. All teachers must gather in the dining hall. With these words, a determined silence fell over the students. McGonagall's resolve not only instructed but also instilled a resilient courage in the hearts of all present. Rose showed a dignified look. She turned and looked at Hermione. "Myone, go to the dormitory, I'll help." "I'm going with you," Hermione replied, with veiled determination in her voice. "Hermione." Rose raised her voice, more incisive, holding Hermione's face between her hands. "This is not a drill. It's real combat, and you could get seriously hurt, or worse. I won't let you face this alone." Hermione stood firm, defying Rose's insistence. Confronted with those brown eyes filled with ironclad determination, Rose sighed, resigned. "All right, but once the battle starts, you must keep your distance from me," said Rose, her voice firm and authoritative, making it clear that she would not accept any objections. From the intensity of the magical vibrations beyond the barrier, she knew she would be facing at least 3 special grade wizards. The moment the confrontation unfolded, destruction was inevitable. Rose would never forgive herself if something happened to Hermione because of one of her own attacks. "Yes, I'll run as far away as possible." Recognizing that there were no more arguments in her favor, Hermione agreed, and together, the two ran toward the dining hall. To their surprise, upon arriving, they found they were not the only ones intent on helping. The dining hall already housed a notable group of students from all houses: Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and even some from Gryffindor. It seemed that the impulse to fight was shared by many. "I know you are here with good intentions, but many of you are just beginning your studies. You do not have enough experience to face a danger like this," said Professor Flitwick. His voice, usually sweet and calm, now carried a rare severity. At that moment, the doors of the dining hall opened again, causing all eyes to turn towards Rose and Hermione. Indifferent to the curious gazes, Rose walked directly up to Professor McGonagall, her expression as grave as her words. "Professor, outside the barrier, there are 3 special grade wizards," she reported urgently. Upon hearing this, a tense silence spread through the dining hall, cutting off any murmur that previously filled the air. The reality of the imminent danger silenced everyone present, leaving a heavy atmosphere of anticipation and fear. Even Minerva and Phileas couldn't help but take a deep breath at this information. "Are you certain of this, Lady Potter?" Phileas asked, his eyes calm. "Absolutely certain," Rose replied firmly. Minerva and Phileas exchanged glances, each seeing the caution and calm in the other's eyes. Both had been through wars, they were not novices to be panicked by such news. "Change of plans," declared Minerva, authoritatively. "Even if reinforcements arrive, they will not be sufficient to stop 3 special grade wizards. However, they also will not be able to penetrate Hogwarts, even if they try. The barrier will remain undefeated, even against such adversaries. And if the barrier is broken?" Hermione, always pragmatic, raised a legitimate concern, the anxiety evident on her face. "There's no need to worry about that, Miss Granger," assured Minerva. "Hogwarts has stood for over 1,000 years, largely because of that barrier. Even after a millennium, it represents the pinnacle of defense in the wizarding world." Turning to Phileas, she continued in a grave tone, "Albus is in Israel, and we do not know where Asterion is. I need you at the entrance to the core, even if it seems impossible that anyone could breach it, but it's never bad to be cautious." Phileas nodded and obeyed the orders without question, like a seasoned soldier. Despite his short stature, the students present could not help but look at his retreating back with admiration. Looking down the dark and gloomy corridor, illuminated only by torches burning with flickering flames, 2 figures stop and dare not step into the corridor. Fascinating, the entire corridor is magically enchanted with thousands of magical traps. Even a semi-special grade wizard entering would be K*LLED within minutes, spoke one of the figures, cloaked in a black mantle, his voice raspy and sibilant. "It was Voldemort," parasitizing the body of Quirinus, or at least, what was left of it. Voldemort's condition was dire at this moment. Half of Quirinus's face was rotting, with decomposing skin and maggots disgustingly moving underneath. Even walking was complicated for Voldemort at this point. The price for using the innate technique using another person's body made him pay a bitter price, which even with unicorn blood, he could only return to his peak for a few minutes. As for Quirinus's consciousness, it had been long dead. Voldemort had k***led him and completely occupied his body. Remembering how he had come to this deplorable state, Voldemort's red eyes shone with cold murderous intent. The hatred for Asterion in Voldemort's heart was no worse than his hatred for Dumbledore at this moment. If not for Asterion, his plans would have proceeded smoothly. He would have obtained the Philosopher's Stone and regained his strength. He would not be in this humiliating state. Master Voldemort! Hearing the old and raspy voice, Voldemort's scarlet eyes fell upon the old man beside him. Voldemort hid well the disgust and intent to k***ll in his gaze, facing the Hogwarts traitor. Let us begin, Argus Filch, Voldemort spoke in a cold tone. The flickering torchlight partially illuminated the aged appearance of the Hogwarts caretaker. Author's thoughts: I found the identity of the traitor quite obvious. Laughing face, Chapter 72, Chapter 70, Invasion of Hogwarts, 3. Voldemort watched, hidden in the shadows, as Argus Filch walked down the long, dark corridor, unaware of what he represented, inadvertently avoiding any magical traps. Whispering to himself, with a note of surprise and irony tinting his cold voice, he reflected. Rowena Ravenclaw, with all her wisdom, probably never imagined that the defenses she designed would have such a glaring flaw. Not that it's her fault, of course. Who, after all, could have predicted that a muggle devoid of magic might one day work at Hogwarts? In her eyes, and those of all the founders, the idea of a muggle walking the halls of Hogwarts would be unthinkable. Yet, this gap, this blind spot in the old-school defenses, allowed someone completely devoid of magic to enter the core undetected by the defenses. The revelation of this flaw in the magical defenses of Hogwarts, designed by one of the wisest witches of all time, served as a grim reminder to Voldemort of the power and, at the same time, the limitations of magic. Magic was different from humans. It didn't think and couldn't alter itself to fix those flaws. It was like a cold, calculating, lifeless program. Argus Filch, devoid of magic, was invisible to the magical defenses, almost as if he posed no threat. Ironically, given the situation, he would put all of Hogwarts in danger in just a few moments. Suddenly, a colorless spell burst from the shadows, striking Voldemort's decaying body squarely. He barely had time to raise a magical barrier to protect his vital parts before the detonation. Boom! The corridor reverberated with the explosion. Impossible! Voldemort writhed in fury and shock. I didn't detect anyone nearby. As his body was torn apart by the magic of the Bombarda spell, shock and surprise completely overtook his mind. Struggling to retreat, Voldemort touched the void where his right arm had once been and, with widened eyes, stared at the small figure pointing a wand at him. Filius Flitwick. Voldemort hissed the name with contempt and pain. He had made a mistake. He hadn't accounted for Filius Flitwick's innate technique. The Invisible Man's Walk. The innate technique had no destructive power but consisted of hiding the user's entire presence. This included scent, sounds, and even magical fluctuations. Filius Flitwick was feared by many wizards because of his innate technique. Voldemort would rather fight a powerful but inexperienced Asterion than face Filius, a powerful and experienced semi-special grade wizard, especially in his current physical state. Drinking unicorn blood to recover would indeed restore his power to its peak, but only for a brief period. If Dumbledore were to arrive and see him in a weakened state after the effects of the unicorn blood wore off, this Horcrux would be destroyed. This was unacceptable to Voldemort. Ready to die? Filius spoke coldly, his gaze never wavering from the man before him. It won't be so easy to k***ll me, you filthy half-blood, Voldemort replied, his voice regaining its usual calm after the initial shock. Filius remained indifferent to the taunt and vanished from Voldemort's view, putting the Dark Lord on high alert. Holding Quirinus's wand with the arm that still remained, Voldemort looked cautiously around. His sharpened senses did not detect anyone's presence, even the air seemed normal without any disturbances. Suddenly, his instincts screamed danger. Driven by decades of experience as a feared and powerful wizard, he trusted his instincts and leaped from his initial position. At the spot where he had been, an invisible slash tore through the floor, leaving a deep scar in the stone. Without wasting time, Voldemort's instincts stirred again, warning of danger. Moving along the walls, Voldemort dodged each attack, alternating between running up the walls, across the ceiling, and sliding on the floor. Each one nearer to hitting him than the previous one, the attacks seemed to come dangerously close. Knowing he couldn't just keep running, Voldemort began to cast spells in all directions. As if in a Star Wars battle, spells flew tearing through the confined space of the corridor while both dodged each spell masterfully. Filius ran upside down along the ceiling while pointing his wand at the fleeting shadow running along the left wall. With the wand in his right hand, Filius began to cast spells using his own left hand as a wand, doubling the number of spells launched. At that moment, Filius turned into a veritable machine gun of lethal spells. Each spell he cast took no more than 0.5 seconds. Voldemort stopped retaliating and focused on dodging the spells while cursing the genius of the Hogwarts professor. The half-blood had an impressive talent for spell work, and combined with his innate technique, Filius was truly a troublesome opponent. While they battled, Argus had reached the core of Hogwarts. Pushing through the massive doors that separated the outside world from the deepest innards of Hogwarts, Argus Filch barely glanced at the hundreds of millions of runes that covered the walls around him, each pulsing with ancient stories and magical powers unknown. His focus was solely on the crystal ball that floated serenely in the center of the room, bathed in green and blue lights that danced around it like a aurora borealis. To a wizard, those lights represented pure and extremely concentrated magic, drawn directly from the ley line that ran beneath Hogwarts. This crystal ball was not just a mystical ornament, it functioned as the core of Hogwarts, the beating heart that supplied magic to fortify the school's defenses. Disregarding the danger he might be in, Filch stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the crystal ball. He was a man without magic in a world where magic was everything. Feeling the warm energy flowing through his body as he held the core brought tears to his tired eyes. Every day, Filch saw magic, lived alongside it, but he could never touch it or control it like the wizards around him. The pain of being so close, yet eternally distant, filled him with a mix of contempt, resentment, and deep melancholy. Now, before him, was the promise of change. The Archbishop of the Aurora Society had offered him a chance, not just to belong, but to be transformed. The reward for his cooperation would be something Filch had never dared to dream possible, magic within his grasp. "I just need to break this and I will finally have magic," he murmured to himself, the weight of the decision making his voice tremble. Without further hesitation, driven by a lifetime of repressed longing, Filch lifted the core above his head and, with a cry that mixed despair and hope, hurled the crystal sphere onto the hard ground. The sound of the impact echoed like thunder, followed quickly by a tremor, almost as if Hogwarts itself was weeping. At the moment the crystal ball shattered into millions of white crystals, a colossal amount of magical energy was expelled. Before Argus Filch could say anything, he was vaporized by the vast amount of magical energy. Filius, who had been relentlessly attacking Voldemort, stopped and looked in disbelief at the trembling castle. "This isn't possible," he murmured to himself. Suddenly, a sharp pain snapped him out of his thoughts. Looking down, Filius saw a long streak of blood across his chest, almost as if an invisible sword had slashed him. With a look of guilt, Filius's body fell to the ground, uncertain whether he was alive or dead. "Ha ha 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 ha!" Only Voldemort's laughter echoed through the halls of Hogwarts. "Ha ha 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 ha!" Only Voldemort's laughter echoed through the halls of Hogwarts. Voldemort laughed and pulled out the flask containing the unicorn blood. Without any hesitation, he drank the sacred liquid. As the defenses around Hogwarts fell silent, Voldemort sensed the shift in the magical currents. The protective barriers that had once made the castle nearly impenetrable were now weakened. This was his chance not just to recover but to gain power that would make him unstoppable. He swiftly moved through the corridors of the school, now quiet and dimly lit, as the magic that had animated Hogwarts seemed to drain away. The usually vibrant tapestries and animated portraits hung still and silent, as if mourning the loss of the core. Voldemort's path was clear, and his mind was focused. The location of the Philosopher's Stone, hidden deep within the castle and guarded by a series of complex enchantments and creatures, was now within reach. Without the school's magical defenses at full strength, he could bypass what had once seemed insurmountable obstacles. The laughter that had echoed so ominously through the corridors turned into a sinister smile of anticipation. If he could possess the stone, he would not only restore his own life but also have the power to conquer death itself. This was more than just a recovery of power, it was the ascension to an absolute dominion that Voldemort had always envisioned for himself. Chapter 73, Chapter 71, Invasion of Hogwarts, 4. With such a massive amount of magic being expelled so suddenly, it would have blown up all of Hogwarts in an instant. Fortunately, the location of the core was magically protected in case something like this happened. After all, no matter how stable something is, there will always be moments of fierce magical fluctuations due to the movements of the ley lines. Although it didn't destroy Hogwarts, the entire castle shook, the blue barrier protecting the castle flickered a few times, almost as if it would disappear at any moment. Fortunately, the barrier held firm, although its color was much more opaque. Herpo, the Archbishop, and Grindelwald didn't need to speak to each other, they knew what to do at that moment. The three of them drew their wands and pointed them at Hogwarts, still shielded by the barrier. At that very moment, 3 gigantic spells shot out from the tips of their 3 wands, violently tearing through the air and colliding with the barrier. The 3 spells, fired simultaneously by Herpo, the Archbishop, and Grindelwald, were of devastating power. Converging at one point, they formed a vortex of raw energy that threatened to break the already weakened magical barrier of Hogwarts. The barrier, now pulsing in a pale and unstable blue, oscillated violently under the impact of the spells. Sparkling lights shot from its surface like sparks from a forge, each ripple containing within it a silent plea for preservation. Inside the castle, students and professors felt the ground shake beneath their feet. Corridors and rooms vibrated with the uncontrolled energy released by the destruction of the core, and now, with the barrier being bombarded, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Then, what everyone feared happened in a mere second. Minerva watched the barrier that had protected Hogwarts for over a millennium break in a single instant under the devastating attack of 3 especial grade wizards. She didn't know what had happened at the core, nor whether Phileas was alive, but she knew she had to focus on what was happening. Minerva crouched down and touched the cold rock of the floor. Without hesitation, she used her innate technique. World manipulation, she murmured calmly. Making the castle shake even more, stone walls rose from the ground with a thunderous sound, encircling the entire castle. In the next second, Minerva kept up her attack with pillars of stone. Massive stone pillars shot towards the hill where the 3 high-grade wizards were located, according to Rose. As the stone pillars hurtled through the air, they seemed almost alive, directed by Minerva's unwavering intent to protect Hogwarts. The landscape around the hill was abruptly reshaped as the pillars landed, creating a barrage that served both as defense and attack. Each pillar slammed into the ground with such force that it sent shockwaves through the area, aiming to disrupt the wizards' concentration and block further assaults on the castle. Minerva McGonagall, a very powerful innate technique. Unfortunately, she lacks enough talent, otherwise, she would be one of the strongest, capable of destroying entire countries with that innate technique, Grindelwald said calmly as he watched the enormous pillars approaching. A mere semi-special grade witch heretic, the Archbishop scoffed disdainfully. Herpo and Grindelwald merely rolled their eyes at the Archbishop's words, both aware that this kind of fanatic couldn't communicate like a truly intelligent person. Seeing that the Archbishop and Grindelwald didn't move to block the attack, Herpo reluctantly waved his wand gracefully, and the next moment, all the stone pillars transformed into butterflies. "You blocked our view, foolish heretic," the Archbishop complained loudly, as tens of thousands of butterfly mirages filled the sky. Being called a foolish heretic by the very organization he himself had whimsically created caused Herpo's lips to twitch abnormally. Suddenly, the expressions on Herpo and Grindelwald's faces changed drastically. A gigantic multicolored sword broke through a section of the stone wall and flew towards the hill where they stood. Grindelwald did not hesitate, he apparatted along with his acolytes and disappeared. Herpo followed suit, apparating away as well. The Archbishop was the slowest, he only had time to grab a few subordinates before apparating, leaving almost 30 fanatics behind. The multicolored sword arrived moments after they would have been hit. Boom! Like a nuclear explosion, a cloud of steam and heat rose into the sky. The terrain around shattered, and gigantic chunks of earth and stone were thrown upward. As for the fanatics left behind, they all turned into ashes floating in the air. Behind the wall, a huge humanoid figure rose, gigantic wings of golden light unfolded on the figure's back. It appeared to be a woman with long white hair wearing angelic armor. It was a Valkyrie. The war maiden Minlava Iris. On another hill, Herpo looked at the huge cursed spirit with surprise. "I have to admire the boy's imagination, he really knows how to create powerful cursed spirits," Herpo laughed and said, gazing at the Valkyrie who seemed more like a goddess than a cursed spirit, although the malignant energy was unmistakable. Looking to the side, Herpo noticed the calm expression on Grindelwald's face, as if he had known in advance. "Asterion is not in Hogwarts according to the information," which means he placed this cursed spirit to protect someone, Herpo continued, speaking with a gentle smile. Grindelwald narrowed his eyes and looked at Herpo, disliking the mysterious man spying on the successor he had chosen in case he died today. Perhaps noticing the displeasure in the seer's gaze, Herpo returned the look with a gentle and friendly smile. Just as he was about to speak, a gigantic pillar of light fell from the sky and collided with the Valkyrie. It seems the Archbishop has begun, Herpo said before apparating away again. Grindelwald looked to his acolytes behind him and spoke calmly. Begin. Yes, my master. With that, they all apparat. Grindelwald remained at the location, waiting for the arrival of his old rival and lover. After all, without anyone to delay the most powerful man in the world, this entire operation would be a failure. Seeing the cursed spirit that emerged from her shadow, Daphne felt an inexplicable sweetness in her heart. This is good, at least one of the 3 special grade wizards is occupied, Minerva murmured in relief upon seeing the cursed spirit that looked more like a goddess, but the malignant energy was unmistakable. It was a cursed spirit. Minerva looked towards Rose, hesitating. Did she really want to send a child who hadn't even finished her first year to fight? But before Minerva could decide, Rose, who had been paying attention to the cursed spirit, turned her gaze towards the man who had suddenly appeared at the entrance of the Great Hall. He had features of Middle Eastern descent, dressed in an elegant black suit with a perfectly groomed beard framing his face. Who are you? Rose asked, drawing the attention of everyone in the Great Hall. Everyone, including Minerva, felt a shiver run through their bodies at the gaze of that man. A special grade wizard. Chapter 74, Chapter 72, Invasion of Hogwarts, 5. Looking into the incredibly blue eyes reflecting the purest blue sky, Herpo spoke with a gentle smile. It's been 643 years since I saw another Six Eyes bearer. He didn't care about the fear everyone felt of him. Was it normal to fear something you couldn't control? Rose narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. The man in front of her hadn't lied about meeting another Six Eyes bearer, or at least, he controlled every part of his body to make her think so. You should be in a pyramid, drying up like a mummy instead of walking around, spooky grandpa, Rose said sarcastically as her blue eyes began to glow with a phosphorescent gleam. Meanwhile, she gestured for all the students and teachers to leave the cafeteria. Minerva looked at the student with a worried expression and left the cafeteria. If they stayed, they would only be burdens to her if the fight started. Professor McGonagall began to leave with the students and teachers, ready for any enemy attack. Spooky grandpa. Herpo stroked his beard and murmured with an intrigued look. It's not very kind to call an elder something like that. Suddenly, Herpo dodged the hand that appeared abruptly behind him, aiming for his heart. Looking back, he found Rose smiling coldly at him. That was sneaky. I expected more from you, Lady Potter, Herpo said, spreading his arms with a desperate expression on his face. A friend of mine taught me that we should strike when the enemy least expects it, Rose shrugged and replied with a big smile on her face. She seemed more relaxed with just her and the enemy alone. So she could fight without fear of hurting anyone in the battle. A very wise advice. Only fools fight head-on with the enemy. Unfortunately, this method only works with inexperienced people, Lady Potter, Herpo nodded, very pleased with Rose's words. As for the people who left, he didn't care, his goal was to talk to Rose in the first place. You're the man who fought Asterion, Rose said, looking at the features of the man in front of her. You know him? Herpo feigned surprise and began to speak amiably. I almost lost this body in a moment of carelessness. He's unbelievably cunning and despicable for someone his age. That's the Asterion I know, he's quite despicable when it comes to fights, Rose agreed perfectly with the enemy's words. Asterion didn't hesitate to use questionable methods to win. What's your goal? Circling the enemy, Rose asked as her hands formed a seal. I'm just a humble researcher, he replied, his voice gentle and warm. I love magic above all, but there's something I haven't discovered in 2,000 years of my existence: the end of everything, the end of magic, the root. As he mentioned the root, his expression twisted into a tangle of pure excitement and euphoria. His gaze focused on Rose, more precisely on her eyes, as if he saw the most precious thing in the world. 2,000 years, cursed 2,000 years. I've waited for so long, I don't feel pain anymore, but my soul aches, Herpo spoke gently, his features returning to normal. This man was insane. Rose added Mustafa to her list of crazies. Someone with a sane mind definitely wouldn't say what he said. You're not sane, you should go to church. God must help a bit with that screwless mind, tapping her thumb on her own head, Rose grinned widely and spoke with a softer tone, as if talking to someone with a severe mental illness. Even with over 2,000 years of life experience, Herpo couldn't help but curl his lips in frustration. The youth of today are truly remarkable, he spoke, his smile gradually fading. Rose had really managed to irritate him. Don't get angry, I'll *LL you forever and end your torment, dear lost lamb. Rose noticed his anger and smiled gently, almost like an angel declaring the fate of a sinner. I'll enjoy tearing out your eyes and hearing your screams of agony, Herpo spoke coldly, without any smile on his face. Innate spell manipulation, supreme soul permanence, soul manipulation. A blue halo covered Herpo's hand, and without hesitation, he vanished from where he stood and reappeared in front of Rose. Rose, on the other hand, appeared sitting on Herpo's back with a smile on her face. You missed, she spoke with a teasing smile. Herpo instantly changed direction, his entire torso twisted inhumanly, as if he had no bones or muscles. This caught Rose by surprise, but facing the hand approaching her, she just looked bored as the hand failed to advance further. You have to try harder, Mr. Spooky. Rose approached Herpo's hand and spoke with a tone capable of irritating anyone. Herpo took a deep breath and felt that this fight would be exhausting. He only hoped the Archbishop would arrive earlier to help him. This girl was really managing to irritate him in a way he had never experienced before. Outside Hogwarts, the battle between a Valkyria and the Archbishop was intense. Falling from a great height in the sky, the Archbishop murmured piously. Innate spell manipulation, father of light, celestial light manipulation. Under the control of his magical energy, light condensed into a huge whip of light in his hands. Without hesitation, he manipulated the light whip. The pliable whip tore violently through the air with extreme speed. In a millisecond, the whip struck the cursed spirit, tearing a large part of Valkyria's shoulder. Seizing the opportunity, the Archbishop condensed a huge sword of light in his hands and swung the sword towards the cursed spirit's head. But before it reached the War Maiden, a gigantic barrier of wind stopped the light sword. In the next second, under the confused eyes of the Archbishop, a colorful sword appeared in Valkyria's hand. She wielded the sword, and a beam of concentrated light shot out from it towards him. Sensing the imminent danger, threads made of light manifested below the Archbishop, covering a large area of the sky. He landed on a light thread and slid along it as if skating on ice. As he dodged the light beam, sliding between golden threads of light, pillars of light descended from the sky, opening huge holes in the clouds. The Archbishop simply lowered his hand, forcing all the pillars of light to fall from the sky. The pillars descended from the sky at a frightening speed, bombarding the earth mercilessly. The Valkyria covered Hogwarts with a barrier of wind, blocking any attack that would cause the destruction of the castle. The furious winds from the impact between the barrier and the pillars of light swept through the surroundings, destroying everything in their path. The War Maiden maintained the wind barrier and began to float in the air, gaining great altitude. Storm clouds covered the sky in an instant, thunder boomed loudly in the heavens, announcing the arrival of a colossal attack. The Valkyria, flying in the sky, pointed her sword at the Archbishop and flew towards him at great speed. Her enormous size did not diminish her speed in the slightest. Foul creature! Faced with Valkyrie's attack, the Archbishop did not back down. He condensed two large swords in both hands and met her head-on. The gigantic difference in size seemed somewhat comical, but when the swords from both sides clashed, they made the sounds of thunder seem like you were listening to them at a low volume. Shockwaves spread through the air, causing huge furious winds. The Archbishop stepped back slightly, and both swords in his hands transformed into whips of light attacking Valkyria from various directions. Due to the frightening speed of the light whips, the Valkyria had no time to react and was struck. Half of her body was cut in half, blue blood raining down from the sky like a blue shower. In the next moment, dozens of light spikes pierced Valkyria's body as the Archbishop smiled cruelly. Unconcerned with his own injury, Valkyria pointed to the storm-filled sky and lowered her only remaining arm. From the sky came a flash, followed by the sound of thunder. In a single second, a gigantic pillar of pure electricity descended from the clouds, hitting the Archbishop squarely, leaving him no time to react to the unexpected attack. An agonizing scream echoed in the sky. Author's thoughts: I feel sorry for Rose's enemies. Laughing face, Chapter 73, Invasion of Hogwarts, 6. When the pillar of electricity ceased, the Archbishop still stood on the ground, his priestly red mantle long gone, burns of varying degrees appearing on his body. He breathed heavily as he watched the cursed spirit regenerate and return unscathed in a matter of moments. Gritting his teeth, he spoke almost growling, you let yourself be struck to create an opening for an attack, well done. I didn't expect a filthy beast like you to be capable of such thinking. But you will die now, he said, crossing both arms to make the sign of the cross and murmuring coldly. Domain expansion, great expansion of the universe. All the noise around him ceased completely. The barriers were formed in an instant, and he manifested his innate technique within the barrier, smiling victoriously. The entire domain expansion occurred in a mere second, no, even less than a second. 0.0000001 milliseconds. The domain expansion stretched up to the sky and covered the War Maiden. If anyone were to see the domain expansion from within, they would see an entire space dark, cold, and lifeless. In the vastness of this space, there was a single bright point. All matter concentrated into a singularity in space and time. Then, an extremely rapid explosion occurred, a number inconceivable for human understanding. With a blinding glow, the entire Valkyria evaporated in an instant. She didn't even have time to react or do anything. When the domain expansion barrier broke, the Archbishop arrogantly smiled and walked, wounded and ragged, toward the castle. Never in his life had anyone come out alive from his domain expansion, and today was no different. Although feeling almost half of his magical energy disappear, the Archbishop smiled bitterly. The domain expansion, though powerful, cost a lot to manifest in the real world. Grindelwald, who watched the entire fight up close, calmly looked at the Archbishop. Though he was a madman, he had the capital to be arrogant. Such a powerful domain expansion was truly rare and frightening. Suddenly, the Dark Lord heard a loud, sharp snap behind him. Smiling gently, he turned and saw who was waiting. "You took quite a while, Albus," he said, looking at the most powerful man in the world. Albus Dumbledore didn't respond and looked at Hogwarts with a cold, pragmatic calmness. The surroundings of Hogwarts seemed to have been the scene of a battlefield, with huge craters and the ground charred and blackened. After looking at Hogwarts through what was left of the barrier, Albus confirmed that everyone was okay, although they were all fighting their respective opponents. This relieved his concern. Then, he turned to his old lover and spoke with a smile. "Gellert, you look handsome in that outfit." "Of course I do, I prepared extensively for this occasion," Grindelwald laughed and arrogantly lifted his head. Both seemed like old friends rather than enemies about to k*ll each other. Albus laughed too and transfigured his blue robe into a sleek blue suit, much easier for fighting. "You will die here, Gellert," he said with a gentle, compassionate tone. Grindelwald's smile grew, his eyes beginning to glow with a phosphorescent light. "We shall see about that, Albus," Grindelwald replied, laughing. But before the battle, they both raised extremely strong barriers around them. The entire environment changed into a world filled with grass and a blue sky. They could fight within this barrier without sinking the entire island of Britain. With preparations made, they both spoke at the same time. "Innate spell manipulation, the inevitable future, the future I see. Innate spell manipulation, the eternal flaming sun, radiant Sunday." White flames surrounded Dumbledore while Grindelwald's body remained unchanged, though his eyes glowed like two pale moons. Dumbledore waved his hand, and a gigantic sword of white fire manifested in his hand. With a gentle smile, he thrust the sword into the ground, and in the next moment, everything within 10 kilometers around him burst into flames instantly. The massive wave of heat swept through the entire environment within the barrier, increasing the temperature hundreds of degrees. "Don't die, Gellert." Looking at the intact man, Albus laughed and spoke. Inside Hogwarts, Rose and Herpo were engaged in an extremely fast-paced hand-to-hand battle, though the disadvantage was obvious to everyone, as Herpo couldn't even touch Rose in the first place. Dodging Rose's leg, Herpo showed no anger at seeing his attacks being ineffective. He had already expected this for a long time. Rose was virtually invincible within the infinity, the space around her extending to an incalculable distance, making any attack, whether physical or energetic, impossible to reach her. Herpo had to admit, fighting someone like this made you feel like you were worthless with no combat power. The world was truly unfair, always favoring some, and Rose Potter was the chosen one. But Herpo wasn't unarmed against this invincible defense. Magic was incredible and could truly perform miracles, but miracles cost an immeasurable amount of magical energy. So, he only had one chance, a chance to manipulate the space around Rose for 0.5 seconds in exchange for all the magic in his body, which is why he needed an assistant, who had just arrived at the scene. The smell of burnt human flesh hung in the air, causing Rose and Herpo to look at the man wearing tattered clothes with a strange look. Rose laughed and taunted loudly, "Do you want me to get salt? Unsalted meat is a very sad thing. The Archbishop grimaced upon hearing this, he gritted his teeth and spoke with a cold, venomous voice. Finally, I've met you. Abomination. Sorry, I don't give autographs to undercooked meat. Rose spoke with a smile, her tone dripping with sarcasm and amusement. The Archbishop breathed heavily. At this moment, the pain from the burns on his body was infinitely less painful than Rose's taunts. With a flick of his hand, a violent whip of light tore through the walls of Hogwarts as if they were made of clay and flew towards Rose, who stood still in the face of the attack. Don't be shy, come closer. Rose lifted her head and spoke arrogantly, approaching the Archbishop with an excited smile on her face. The Archbishop transformed the whips of light into two broadswords in both hands and attacked. He stomped on the ground forcefully, creating a crater beneath him, and flew towards Rose. He reached her extremely quickly and struck with both swords. But to the Archbishop's surprise, the swords didn't even come within 20 centimeters of her before stopping completely. Trapping the burnt man with the limitless, making space act as a second skin for him, locking him in place, Rose raised her index finger and murmured with a gentle smile on her face. Innate spell manipulation limitless red. Above her finger, a swirling red ball of energy formed, altering the gravity of the environment the moment it appeared. Don't die, Mr. Undercooked Meat. With her words, the innate spell was cast, hitting the man's abdomen. The Archbishop only managed to reinforce his body with magic and spit out a large amount of blood before being thrown backward, crashing through wall after wall, one after another. Herpo looked at the scene and placed his hand over his face. Fighting against a strong enemy wasn't despairing, plans could mitigate the power difference. But having incompetent allies, that was truly despairing. But Rose didn't stop there. Innate spell manipulation limitless blue. Under Rose's index finger, a swirling blue ball of energy formed. Rose looked at Herpo and smiled gently. Herpo didn't react before being pulled towards Rose at extreme speed. Grabbing Herpo by the neck, Rose showed a somewhat frightening smile and spoke. I promised that when I found you, I would beat you up so badly that your mother probably wouldn't recognize you. My mother has been dead for over 2,000 years, I thank every night that she's burning in the flames of hell. Herpo spread his arms and spoke with a smile. Even better that she's dead, at least she won't see her son getting beaten up by a 13-year-old girl. Rose retorted with a bright smile, showing impeccably white teeth. Has anyone ever told you that you're an annoying girl? Herpo contorted his face and replied in a helpless tone. No, everyone says how incredibly beautiful, intelligent and powerful I am, like the reincarnation of a Greek goddess, Rose responded with a narcissistic and arrogant tone. You and Asterion were made for each other, Herpo gritted his teeth and muttered, finding the shamelessness of both teenagers incredible. Before Rose could unleash an unprecedented beating on Herpo, a whip of light tore through the air at that moment, but instead of aiming at Rose, it was directed towards Herpo. Instinctively, Rose released the neck she was holding, and Herpo jumped back while holding his neck with a smile. Emerging from the hole in the wall, the blood-covered Archbishop returned to help Herpo. Arriving by his side, Herpo spoke while keeping his gaze on Rose, who seemed unconcerned. Don't attack again without thinking, you stupid lunatic. The infinity around her protects her from any physical and energetic attack. You could have said that earlier, you stupid heretic, the Archbishop spoke with a dissatisfied tone. I thought you already knew, after all, we're attacking her, Herpo spoke in a tone of injustice. Humph. When my lord needs me, he just points, and I obey. I don't need to research about this abomination, the Archbishop spoke piously while not hiding the pride in his voice. At this moment, Herpo just wanted to turn around and leave this place as quickly as possible, both his allies were troublesome. One was a stupid lunatic and leader of a cult, the other was also a lunatic, though more pragmatic. With her hands behind her head, Rose spoke at this moment. If you want, I can give you some time to formulate a strategy. I'm having a lot of fun right now, having two punching bags is really comfortable. Whether Herpo or the Archbishop, both wanted to rip Rose's tongue out, they had never encountered someone so irritating in their lives. Author's thoughts, I had a lot of fun writing these 2 chapters, writing Rose's fight was quite funny, at least for me. If anyone hasn't noticed yet, Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore's powers were inspired by Bleach. As for the inspired characters, I don't need to say, it's pretty obvious. Chapter 76, Chapter 74, Invasion of Hogwarts, 7. You know, if I wanted to, I could K*LL you both at any moment, Rose said with a smile as she placed her two hands straight in front of her. Between her hands were the figures of Herpo and the Archbishop. She continued, "If I bring my palms closer, this happens." Rose smiled and brought both palms closer together. As she did so, whether it be Herpo or the Archbishop, both felt the space around them suddenly shrink. They looked at Rose with the same angry gaze. She definitely didn't need to say that, she could very well k*ll them at this moment. But to irritate them, she purposely spoke, wanting to make them feel fear and terror. "If I keep pressing, you'll become a tomato sauce seasoned with human organs." Unconcerned with their stares, she continued to whisper with a rather sadistic and cold tone. "Are you having fun now? Because I'm quite excited at the moment, excited to crush you like insignificant bugs." Rose felt she was spending too much time with Asterion, she wasn't this sadistic before meeting him. "Can you stop her for a second?" Herpo asked with a smile, not worried about being k*lled. If he were k*lled, that was just one of his many bodies, he had many others ready to receive him at any moment. "I can do much more than stop her for a second, I can k*ll you right now." The Archbishop spoke coldly as he clasped his hands, ready to use his domain expansion. Suddenly, the space around him violently contorted, breaking his body as if someone were crushing a soda can. Blood sprayed everywhere, staining the walls a crimson red. The Archbishop of the Aurora Society spat out a large amount of blood and looked incredulously at the white-haired girl who smiled gently at him. This even surprised Herpo, who looked astonished at the 13-year-old girl. "Don't look at me like that, I'll feel shy." Rose hugged herself and spoke with a rosy tone in her cheeks. The Archbishop just spat out another large amount of blood upon hearing this. Herpo covered his face with his palm as he took a deep breath. If possible, he would never encounter Rose Potter again. He had never met such an annoying person in his life, and he had met many famous people who left incredible legacies for humanity. Unfortunately for his plans, Rose's eyes were essential. So even if he failed today, he would return regardless of Rose's strength, because dreams cannot be k*lled. Though the next time he returned, he would bring competent allies, not stupid religious fanatics who didn't possess a single neuron in their heads. "I think we'll die before we even get a chance to touch her," Herpo said to the Archbishop. Struggling to stand, blood dripping onto the floor of Hogwarts, the Archbishop didn't care about his wounds and merely mocked, "Are you afraid of death, stupid heretic? My lord will embrace me after my death." Herpo just rolled his eyes at his comments. In 2000 years, he had never seen a god care about a human. Gods or personifications of concepts, as he preferred to call them, couldn't interfere in the material world under normal circumstances. They seemed more trapped than free, almost as if they couldn't break certain laws. These laws were as old as the world itself. The poor Archbishop didn't know that when he died, it wasn't God who would welcome him with open arms, but the very personification of death, and she wasn't at all kind to humans, especially after the events of the Pervel brothers. Suddenly, an evil laugh echoed from the depths of the hallway, causing everyone to turn and look back. In the shadows of the corridor, a pair of snake-like red eyes glowed. "Ah, what an honor to see the famous Rose Potter," a cold, hissing voice sounded, and from the shadows emerged a figure. He was very handsome with black hair and vibrant red eyes, a cold and cruel smile lining his lips. "What a shoddy job, full of irregularities. But I must admit, you're mad to have split your own soul so many times." As the creator of Horcruxes and with an innate technique related to the soul, Herpo almost immediately noticed the Horcrux fragment in the newcomer's body. He was truly shocked by the size of the soul fragment he was seeing before him. It was tiny, almost 3 times smaller than his own Horcrux fragment. This meant that the man in front of him had divided his soul countless times, something that he, the spell's creator, had never thought of or dared to do. Damage to the soul was not as simple as physical damage. Once damage occurred to one's soul, in the best case scenario, it was a pain 1,000 times worse than physical pain, and in the worst case scenario, death was a relief, as madness and paranoia consumed the mind until their last days. At the same time, Herpo knew who the man in front of him was. "Voldemort," Herpo said with a gentle smile. The moment he said this, a colossal pressure spread throughout Hogwarts like an invisible wave impacting everything in its path, such a large amount of magical energy that it even made the gravity around heavier and the air thinner. "You will all die, and I will ensure it is slowly and with much pain." With her hair wildly floating in the wind, Rose reached out her hand and spoke coldly. "Innate spell manipulation limitless red." Swirling red vortexes of energy manifested on each of the three enemies at an abyssal speed. As Herpo, the Archbishop, and the newcomer, Voldemort, regardless of who he was, were thrown backward, breaking through walls until they exited the castle and landed on relatively flat ground. Since most of the castle's protections were disabled, Rose teleported and appeared at the location where her enemies were thrown. At that moment, Rose was using her 6 eyes at full force, the infinite amount of information from dozens of kilometers appearing before her, impacting her mind and causing immense headaches. I didn't plan to K*LL you too, but now that I know you conspired with this human-shaped trash, you're going to die, Rose said, focusing her gaze on Voldemort, who stood up as if nothing had happened. If I tell you we have nothing to do with each other, would you believe me? Herpo straightened his suit and asked with a sincere smile. What do you think? Rose replied sarcastically. Ugh, Herpo let out a heavy sigh upon hearing this. But Herpo knew that not everything in this plan was a failure, discovering the limits of Rose Potter was crucial for the future. So he wasn't exactly sad at this moment because he had learned valuable information about Rose Potter. What a shame, I liked this body, Herpo murmured to himself. Elsewhere in Hogwarts, the strongest teachers and students battled against the fanatics of the Aurora Society and Grindelwald's acolytos in an unrelenting fight. The professors divided the battlefield, which was the outer courtyard, into 2 fronts. The first front was obviously the professors fighting on the front lines with deadly and cold attacks, almost like cold machines. They were all experienced and powerful wizards. The second row, behind the professors, consisted of students from 4th to 7th year, along with some strong first years like Daphne, Theodore, Zabani, Doria, Draco, and others. Winds and lightning surrounded Daphne's figure, she looked like a goddess in the air with her long blonde hair floating around her. With a simple wave of her hand, powerful lightning bolts tore through the air, striking the fanatics, throwing them away and K*ing them instantly. These people are insane, they rush in as if they can't feel pain or fear of death. Beside Daphne, Tracy shouted, casting a spell at one of the fanatics, sending the opponent flying backward and crashing into the wall. It doesn't matter, just K*LL anyone who manages to get past the professors, Daphne spoke coldly. Unlike other younger students who were hesitating to KLL their opponents, like Tracy beside her, the green grass heiress attacked to KLL without any mercy. One of the first lessons taught to her was to K*LL without hesitation, hesitation leads to death. Suddenly, a massive amount of magical energy made the entire castle tremble, followed by deafening explosions, causing the students to feel their world spinning upside down. Minerva touched the ground of the castle and helped the castle absorb the impacts while continuing to attack the enemies with smaller-scale attacks, as putting too much force into the attacks would destroy the castle and all the students inside it. Because of her innate technique heart of nature, Daphne possessed a great talent for detecting magical and negative energy. In her senses, 4 tyrannical auras clashed outside the castle, along with 2 giant suns colliding further in the background. 6 special grade wizards. Daphne presumed that 2 of the 6 special grade wizards were Elise Rose Potter and Albus Dumbledore. Rose fought against 3 enemies, and Dumbledore against a single enemy, the most powerful one. What in the name of Merlin is happening? Daphne thought when suddenly, she felt a malevolent aura appear on her battlefield. A semi-special grade cursed spirit? How did a cursed spirit appear at this moment? Daphne turned and looked at the male wizard with medium-length black hair and blue eyes. This left her shocked. In her senses, the man in front of her wasn't human. He was a cursed spirit. Aurelius Dumbledore. Daphne heard Professor McGonagall say. His name made Daphne remember the man who appeared at Asterian's birthday party alongside the Dark Lord Grindelwald. Chapter 77, Chapter 75, Invasion of Hogwarts, 8. It's been a while, Minerva, Aurelius greeted as he observed his fallen, unconscious, or dead companions. He didn't blame his comrades for showing such struggle against the strength of the Hogwarts professors. As one of the 3 most prestigious magical schools in the world, Hogwarts had the privilege of having powerful wizards as teachers. While in other magical schools, the magical requirement to become a teacher was grade 4 or 3, at Hogwarts the minimum was grade 2. A wizard of grade 2 was already very powerful, enough to be a commander in many places, but at Hogwarts, they were teachers. Aurelius, you're a disgrace to your father's legacy, Minerva spoke coldly, showing no signs of respect for the man who was on the same level as her. At the mention of his father, Aurelius's blue eyes turned cold, his lips curved into a sarcastic and cold smile. My father? A man who didn't even know I existed. He tried to be my father after all the bad things that happened to me. It's almost funny, as if gaining a father would solve all my problems. Aurelius turned his attention back to Hogwarts and smiled. But it doesn't matter now, my dream is about to come true, soon we'll be in a world pure and free of cursed spirits. Minerva narrowed her eyes, she was not unaware of Grindelwald's ambitions, a crazy purpose she considered completely impossible. You're even crazier than those fanatics from the Aurora Society. Minerva looked at Aurelius as if she were looking at someone with a mental problem. I don't care what you think of me, Minerva. I know the world isn't a fairy tale where everyone listens to what I say, but in the end, they will see that we are their heroes. Aurelius remained impassive in the face of the famous Transfiguration Grand Master's provocations. Besides, my current purpose is to delay time so my companion Vinda can catch the Sephiroth. Drawing his wand, Aurelius continued speaking, not caring about masking his intentions. Upon hearing this, Minerva looked incredulously at Aurelius. She knew what the Sephiroth was, physical manifestations of the ley lines, small crystallized crystals of pure ley line magic. It was still unknown how many years were needed for a ley line to produce a Sephiroth, but it was estimated in the hundreds of thousands of years. Just imagining a small crystal with energy accumulated for hundreds of thousands of years sent a shiver down her spine, causing chills and a premonition that things in the future would be even worse than they were now. You're insane, just moving such a fragile crystal could cause an unimaginable explosion, capable of sinking the entire island of Great Britain, Minerva spoke with a tense and angry voice. You don't need to worry about that, Minerva. We're very professional at this, after all, it's not our first time. Besides, even if it did happen, they could die proud, after all, their deaths wouldn't be in vain. Aurelius smiled coldly, responding with a careless and sarcastic tone. His tone suggested that he didn't care even if the lives of hundreds of millions of people were lost. This caused a fury to bubble up in the chest of the witch who put justice above all else. You filthy cowards! Clenching her teeth, Minerva spoke while firmly holding her wand. But she herself didn't move, a fight at her level would destroy the entire castle, *ling the students still sheltering inside. Seeing Minerva not moving, Aurelius smiled and also remained still, regardless of how many of his comrades were dying. Over Hogwarts, a rift in space opened, and a massive two-headed serpent emerged from it. From the serpent's mouth, Asterion grimly observed the castle. He had been busy collecting all the Horcruxes he knew of outside of Hogwarts when he almost immediately sensed the death of his war maiden. Without hesitation, he summoned his dimensional two-headed serpent and headed for Hogwarts. His main concern was Daphne's safety, especially after the loss of the War Maiden. Asterion felt Daphne's strong aura and breathed a sigh of relief to realize she was okay, though fighting at that moment. He chose not to interfere in the battle, recognizing that it would contribute to Daphne's growth, not only mentally but also in power. The Black Heir's eyes fixed on the gigantic barriers covering a vast area. Within them, he detected two familiar auras, Grindelwald and Dumbledore. Asterion, who once placed some trust in future predictions based on what he knew about Harry Potter in his previous world, now tossed Harry Potter's book aside. The only reliable information was Voldemort's Horcrux locations, but that would only be relevant if Voldemort were the ultimate adversary. However, in this world, Voldemort was just one of the 33 special-grade wizards. Honestly, Asterion was tempted to *LL Grindelwald with Dumbledore's help. After all, the Dark Lord knew some very important secrets about him. Yet, he hesitated. Grindelwald served as a barrier between him and Dumbledore, and if Asterion eliminated Grindelwald, Dumbledore would likely turn his attention to him. Which definitely wasn't good, especially with numerous eyes on him. While giving up on *ling Grindelwald, Asterion focused his gaze on Rose, fighting or rather, that couldn't be called a fight but rather a one-sided massacre. Rose was a monster, you couldn't even touch her, or stop her attacks. Como voce luta contra algumism? Suddenly, Asterion looked at the very handsome man with red eyes. He and the man shared some physical and facial similarities. Asterion smiled coldly. He didn't know how Voldemort managed to regain his body, but it didn't matter. He still remembered the assassination attempt Voldemort orchestrated against him. The Black Heir was someone who held grudges, and this was a great chance for revenge. Making a seal with his hand, Asterion murmured. Come forth, my divine general. Mahoraga. Behind Asterion, gigantic chains manifested, chaining up a humanoid monster. Suddenly, one of the chains broke, followed by the others, one by one, until finally, the last chain binding the Divine General snapped, releasing the monster from its cage. The Divine General plummeted from the sky and landed on the ground with a crash, roaring furiously. An immense pressure covered the battlefield, catching the attention of Rose, Herpo, the Archbishop, and Voldemort. Regardless of who they were, all of them felt a shiver run down their spines as they looked at the white and terrifying humanoid monster with a golden wheel above its head. Damn, how could anyone think of creating something like this? Herpo muttered, feeling his hairs stand on end, warning him of imminent danger. It wasn't his body that was afraid, but the Horcrux. In 2000 years, it was the first time his Horcrux had feared something. That meant that the white aberration in front of him could destroy his Horcrux. Rose was no exception, she felt danger for the first time in her life. At the same time, she lifted her head and looked up, a smile appearing on her lips as she saw the huge two-headed serpent floating in the air, with Asterion looking at her from its mouth with an arrogant look, as if saying to her, "See, I'm amazing." Without hesitation, she teleported and appeared next to Asterion, sitting in the mouth of the huge serpent. "You took your time," Rose looked at him and spoke seriously. Asterion gave no reason for the delay, he truly did not expect Hogwarts to be attacked, nor for the Hogwarts barrier to be broken. "What is that thing?" Seeing that Asterion didn't respond, Rose asked, pointing to Mahoraga. "A melody of war and death." Asterion's lips curved into a sadistic smile as he looked at the three special grade wizards. It was the first time he was using Mahoraga, his cursed spirit was a blank canvas, ready to be painted at any moment. 3 special grade wizards were very suitable for inaugurating his most OP cursed spirit. Mahoraga was also the last of the 3 cursed spirits created to oppose Rose, along with Ouroboros with destiny manipulation and Almisa Mercury, the 2-headed Mercury serpent, capable of devouring dimensions. Together, the 3 could contain Rose. As for K*ling Rose, that was another matter, but as Asterion had said, if it came to a life and death struggle, he could take Rose with him to death. "Let's enjoy and watch their despair, Rose. It will be a preview for our revenge against the murderer of our parents," Asterion spoke, smiling sadistically. "Let's have more fun," Asterion said, looking at the 3 special grade wizards. Intentionally, he made sure they heard his words. Author's thoughts: thank you for the support in the comments, it really means a lot. I'll strive to write and post more chapters. Again, thank you for the support. Chapter 78, Chapter 76, Invasion of Hogwarts, 9. The Archbishop was the first to strike, light shaping into his hand into a whip of light, tearing through the air and heading towards the humanoid monster with wings protruding from its eye sockets at a speed almost impossible for a human to catch. The whip of light tore Mahoraga in half, causing the Archbishop to display an arrogant smile. But in the next moment, his smile stiffened as he heard a loud sound echoing within his mind. Clang! The golden wheel floating above the head of the pale abomination spun. Then, something not too surprising for a cursed spirit happened, it regenerated completely in a single instant. The Archbishop attacked once again with the same whip of light, but instead of the previous scene repeating, the whip struck Mahoraga, causing some damage, but much less than the previous time. This made Voldemort and Herpo's eyes worthy. "I hope it's not what I'm thinking, otherwise, we're completely dead," Herpo joked with a smile, licking his lips feeling how dry they were. Perhaps he would really lose this Horcrux, which would certainly be a pity, as he had only made 2. The Archbishop didn't care about the heretic's words, he didn't believe his attacks had no effect on this pale abomination. Innate feat manipulation, Father of Light, celestial light manipulation. With his words, behind him manifested balls of golden light, from these balls of light, numerous energy beams were fired rapidly. Hundreds of high-heat energy rays hit Mahoraga, who still hadn't moved, almost as if he wanted to be attacked. All the attacks hit Mahoraga, causing huge holes in his body, but in the next moment, all his wounds regenerated completely. The Divine General showed a grotesque smile to the Archbishop and slowly walked towards him, each of his steps causing a hole in the ground. As he walked, the golden wheel above his head spun once again. Clang! The sound echoed louder in the Archbishop's mind, causing his face to contort in fury. He felt that this cursed spirit was mocking him. "I will K*LLU as I did with that cursed spirit before." Before the Archbishop could continue, a huge fist appeared in front of him. He didn't even have time to react when the fist hit him. The Archbishop had only a brief moment of clarity before a tremendous force sent him flying away, leaving blood, teeth, and a large part of his face floating in the air. "I guess he can't talk anymore," Herpo said, looking at the Archbishop's body. The man was still alive, but he didn't think this deplorable state could exactly be called living. Asterion is crazy for creating this abomination, Herpo muttered to himself, looking at the pale cursed spirit. Is he not afraid of losing control? What if this monster adapts its own innate technique it was created with and breaks free from control? Watching the fight, if it could be called that, Herpo knew the cursed spirit's innate technique in front of him. Adaptation. Herpo spoke. Every time we attack, he adapts to our innate technique. Using spells is out of the question, he'll adapt each spell we cast immediately because of the simplicity of the spells. So that's why my Horcrux is afraid, he can adapt to my innate technique, Supreme Soul Permanence, and cause damage to my Horcrux, Herpo muttered to himself, looking at the two-headed serpent hovering above him. He could see Asterion looking at him with a sadistic and cruel smile. I take back what I said, you're nothing like Corvinus. You resemble Salazar more, both of you are mad. Salazar for creating that abomination he calls a basilisk, and you for creating this monster, Herpo said to Asterion. He knew the young man heard every word, reading his lips. Watching the fight, Rose furrowed her brow and came to the same conclusion as Herpo in her mind. She looked at Asterion and asked seriously, are you really crazy or just stupid? How could you create something that can adapt to everything? Asterion shrugged indifferently. Mahoraga will not adapt to my innate technique, it's impossible for him to break free from my control. If you say so, but don't ask for my help when that thing goes out of control. Observing Asterion's indifference, Rose spoke with an irritating smile on her lips. Asterion just scoffed coldly. He wasn't afraid of Mahoraga going out of control. Once created by him, the cursed spirit would always be his slave. Although Rose's concerns were valid, it didn't mean they would happen, especially when Asterion had complete control over his creations. By the way, those two are really strong, Rose said, pointing to the barriers where Grindelwald and Dumbledore were fighting. If it weren't for that barrier, everything within a radius of dozens of kilometers would be turned into nothing but ashes. Dumbledore's innate technique has devastating power, Asterion agreed with Rose's words. Even behind extremely powerful barriers, the blasts of hot air could still be felt by him and anyone close enough. He's worthy of being called the most powerful wizard in the world, Rose smiled and pointed at herself. But not for a long time. Yes, Miss Most Powerful in the world, Asterion replied sarcastically. Mr. Second Most Powerful in the world, Rose retorted with the same sarcasm. Then, she wore a serious look, she looked down and focused her gaze on Voldemort and Herpo. Why did 4 special grade wizards attack Hogwarts? 3 of them were targeting me. Honestly, she already knew the purpose of these 3, one was a mad scientist who wanted her eyes, the religious fanatic wanted to K*LL her for something she did, to be more precise, for being born. Voldemort probably just wanted revenge. After a brief silence, Asterion replied. If you want my guess, I would say Grindelwald wants something that Hogwarts possesses, something valuable enough to risk fighting against the most powerful wizard in the world. As for what that thing was, Asterion had no idea, although he had studied a lot, his accumulated knowledge was too thin to compare with wizards who had over a century of accumulated knowledge. Especially the low-budget Kenjaku whom Asterion presumed to be thousands of years old, the man was probably a walking library. There was no possibility of him comparing to someone that old with only 3 years of study. Rose stroked her chin and looked at Hogwarts with a pensive look. In her eyes, the castle looked completely different from the first time she saw it. At that moment, Hogwarts no longer had that extraordinary magic. It seemed like an old, sick man, about to die at any moment. Rose supposed they had cut off Hogwarts' power source, effectively breaking the impregnable barrier around the castle. But this would only be possible if there was a spy inside the castle, *LLED enough to hide from the castle's magical protections. The first suspect in Rose's mind was obviously Voldemort himself. Even with all of Rose's extraordinary wisdom, she never thought that the barrier protecting Hogwarts for thousands of years would be destroyed by a magicless squib. No matter, in the face of absolute strength, conspiracies are irrelevant. A dragon does not fear ants gathering against it, on the contrary, the dragon would watch with interest as they gather to fight against it. Rose spoke aloud, causing Asterion beside her to roll his eyes at the arrogant words of the 13-year-old girl. If he were the dragon in Rose's analogy, he would K*LL the ants before they could gather against him. It was a danger, however minimal, that Asterion couldn't ignore. You could call him paranoid, but he called it precaution. I'll love to see you getting beaten by those you call ants. I'll watch with popcorn, Asterion sarcastically retorted to Rose, who just showed a big smile on her face. No matter, it will never happen because I am strong, she said with an extremely confident smile capable of irritating anyone with sight. Chapter 79, Chapter 77, Invasion of Hogwarts, 10. Inside the barrier, Grindelwald looked at the world engulfed in flames with indifference. The world I see has no flames. As he said that, shadows fell over the surroundings, and what was once a sea of white fire turned back into a green field. Still holding a massive flaming sword in his hand, Dumbledore smiled and spoke. How many times can you change reality, Gellert? 5? 10? 20? Then the man thrust the sword into the grass once more, and in the next instant, everything for dozens of kilometers burst into flames. The once green and lively land turned into a hell of white flames. Dumbledore knew his former lover's inborn technique very well, it was extremely powerful and versatile, even more so than his own. But such a powerful inborn technique consumed colossal amounts of magical energy with each use. Not only that, the inborn technique itself placed a tremendous burden on the host's body. Gellert only smiled and drew his wand. We'll see who runs out of magical energy first, Albus. Dumbledore furrowed his brow, he assumed they would both use their inborn techniques, but seeing Gellert drawing his wand, he realized something was amiss. Knowing that Dumbledore possessed the Elder Wand, Grindelwald still drew his wand, which was at least audacious. Dispersing the fiery sword, the Elder Wand appeared in Albus's hands. Looking at the legendary wand that was now his, Grindelwald snorted dissatisfied. If it weren't for that fight on the beach, where you had help from your brother, resulting in the death of your sister, you would never have been able to defeat me and claim the Elder Wand. The Elder Wand belonged to Grindelwald, but due to a minor slip-up, he lost the duel and could no longer wield the Elder Wand. The possession of the legendary wand passed to Albus Dumbledore because he defeated Grindelwald, even if it was only due to a momentary lapse in attention when Dumbledore's sister died. A tragic day, Dumbledore commented with a sad, solitary sigh, looking at the wand in his hands. Fools would dream of possessing that wand, but he would trade without hesitation that piece of wood for his sister's life. But Grindelwald only mocked the sorrow Dumbledore showed. A tragic day? You probably used your own sister's life to steal the Elder Wand from me, Albus. Remember, for the greater good. That's not true, Gellert. I loved my sister, I would never use her like that. Dumbledore wasn't angered by his words, but shook his head and spoke with genuine sadness. Then you shouldn't have brought her to the duel, Grindelwald sarcastically remarked. Circumstances led me to bring her, and you know that better than anyone, Dumbledore retorted. But Grindelwald's response wasn't friendly words, it was a cruelly inspired blast of pure magical energy against him. Dumbledore was quick to send another burst of energy, colliding with Grindelwald's magic. With a loud, long hum, the collision of magical powers sent waves of magical energy flying around. Grindelwald made a crescent movement with the wand, sending deadly bolts at dangerous angles. Beams of energy tore through the ground, leaving only destruction behind. Shockwaves and deafening explosions echoed. Dumbledore simply apparat and appeared behind Grindelwald, pointing his wand and not hesitating to cast a Conf Ringo and many other nearly instantaneous spells. Grindelwald easily dodged the spell, smoothly moving to the side, and continued to evade each spell thrown at him with a surprising ease that could even astonish the most veteran of Aurors, almost as if he could see the future. Dumbledore knew that Gellert was seeing the future with his inborn technique, no matter the spell he cast, the opponent would see it before he even launched it. But Dumbledore knew that the future Grindelwald could see had a limit, when that limit was surpassed, Grindelwald wouldn't react in time to evade. That's what happened in the following moments. Clones of Dumbledore surrounded Grindelwald in the center, and a barrage of spells was launched against the Dark Lord. Grindelwald managed to dodge hundreds of spells at once with almost divine movements, but one in particular, camouflaged by dozens of other spells, managed to surpass his prophetic vision, leaving a lacerating cut on one of his shoulders. Or at least, that's what Grindelwald saw in his future. Without a moment of hesitation, he apparat to a particular clone, and a gigantic dragon made of pure blue flames was unleashed from the tip of his wand, engulfing Dumbledore's real body in an instant. Demonic blue flames spread uncontrollably over the scorched earth, leaving the environment even darker and more burnt. But instead of reducing Dumbledore to ashes, the blue fire dragon was halted by equally strong white flames. A sea of blue and white fire spread around, Dumbledore's long white hair fluttering around the white and blue embers floating in the air. You dare use fire against me, Gellert. Dumbledore spoke calmly, waving his wand, and all the fire, including the fiend fire, shaped into a blue and white phoenix that flew against its own summoner. Protego totalum. With a smile, Grindelwald invoked a sturdy shield in front of him, while moving his head aside, dodging the spell cast by Dumbledore who operated behind him. That was very astute of you, Albus. Seeing the Protego totalum not holding up against the power of Dumbledore's spell, Grindelwald spoke before operating hundreds of meters away. Manipulating the blue and white fire phoenix, Dumbledore smiled and spoke gently. We are at war, and war is not won by benevolence. The blue and white fire phoenix dissolved, and a wave of flames covered the entire territory within the barrier. The flames began to spin, making the fire even more furious and full of destructive power. Grindelwald's elegant hairstyle had long since unraveled, his short hair swayed with the furious flames around him. Since you said that, Grindelwald laughed and spoke. I'll be a little cruel, Albus. Grindelwald simply pointed his finger and whispered gently. Inborn spell manipulation, the inevitable future reality manipulation. Albus Dumbledore felt only a huge danger approaching. The world seemed to slow down before Dumbledore. He gripped the Elder Wand and spun his wrist. A Protego totalum was erected before him almost instantly. Using his last milliseconds, Dumbledore forced his body to the side. At that moment, time returned to normal. Dumbledore only felt a sharp pain in his shoulder and looked ahead. The Protego totalum was destroyed. There was no resistance against Grindelwald's inborn spell. Dumbledore didn't change his expression as he looked at the blood running down his arm and the huge hole in his shoulder. He used transfiguration to create fake skin around the wound, stemming the blood, and focused on the fight. You dodged, I aimed for the head. Looking at Albus still alive, Grindelwald spoke with a tone of regret. He knew he had only one chance to use this inborn spell, as a second time wouldn't work against the man in front of him. That was cruel, Gellert. You changed reality in one attack. I almost died just now. Dumbledore spoke with a cheerful laugh. Yet you dodged. You truly are a monster, Albus, Grindelwald said, still shocked that Albus was alive after such an attack. I have to retaliate, Gellert, don't die, Dumbledore said with a serious and deadly look. Inborn spell manipulation, the eternal flaming sun, radiant Sunday. This time, Albus didn't condense a sword, but an arrow floating above his hand. When the arrow manifested, a heat intense enough to reduce anything to ashes spread like an extremely hot wave. Within a radius of 10 kilometers, the ground turned into magma with only Dumbledore standing atop the sea of molten rock. This attack carries the temperature of the sun's radiative zone, all concentrated in a small arrow, an arrow potent enough to destroy anything physical, Dumbledore explained to Grindelwald, who floated in the air. It was good to see you again, Gellert, Dumbledore spoke as if he were speaking to a dead man. Which, in his eyes, Grindelwald was. Without waiting for his response, Dumbledore launched his attack. There was only a blinding light for a moment, then a deafening explosion echoed, a gigantic white sphere with a red core manifested in the sky. Hundreds of kilometers within the barrier transformed into a world of infernal magma and fire. The entire barrier protecting the surroundings from the attack began to crack but remained standing despite the overwhelming assault from the most powerful man in the world, because Dumbledore managed to control the area of impact. Otherwise, this barrier would have already disappeared. When the blinding light ceased, there was no one left inside the barrier except Dumbledore. Gellert. Seeing everything empty, Albus showed a sad expression, but soon regained his composure. Arg! Dumbledore suddenly groaned in pain and held his injured shoulder, yet he walked towards the exit, leaving behind a world of magma. Thoughts of the author: did Grindelwald die? You don't know, but I do, and I won't tell, he, winking and laughing. It was hard to write this fight. I like both characters I created, Dumbledore and Grindelwald. Defeating one didn't please me, but it was necessary. There will be only one more chapter about the invasion of Hogwarts. Chapter 80, Chapter 78, Invasion of Hogwarts, 11. Feel free to take the other one, but I want Voldemort, Rose said, her incredibly blue eyes shining with a cold capable of freezing even the Gobi Desert. Her gaze focused on the handsome young man with black hair and red eyes. She could see he shared a resemblance with the boy next to her. They were cousins after all. This made her realize that this world was quite cruel and cold, as family K*LLED family. Impossible, I want Voldemort too, Asterion refused without hesitation. He still needed to K*LL Voldemort, not only for revenge but also for personal grievances. Seeing the determination in her cousin's eyes, Rose gritted her teeth and spoke. Half. Each of us gets half of him. She spoke as if Voldemort were an item, not a person, which made Asterion see the clear difference between her male version in another reality. Rose Potter was clearly a vengeful person, though kind. She didn't hesitate to k*ll her enemies. She was diligent and constantly improving herself. An obvious difference from her male counterpart. They both locked eyes, firm in each gaze, neither wanting to back down and miss the chance to k*ll their destined enemy at this moment. I accept your proposal, Asterion said, breaking the silence. But before we begin, he may apparate and escape. No need to worry about that, I control space, he won't escape. Rose showed a cold and quite frightening smile. Asterion nodded and threw himself into free fall. Rose followed her cousin and jumped from the mouth of the two-headed serpent. With his hands in his pants pockets, Asterion narrowed his eyes, and his hair fluttered violently against the strong wind. Rose rolled her eyes at her cousin's actions. She also wanted to strike a pose like that, but she was wearing a skirt, which prevented her from doing a really cool pose at the moment. Both fell from the sky and collided with the ground with a thud. Already on the ground, Asterion repeatedly opened and closed his hand while asking Rose, "Have you learned domain expansion?" "I understand the principle behind creating the domain," Rose replied, clenching her hand and cracking her knuckles. "I just haven't used it on anyone yet." "That's good, they'll probably use domain expansion to break the spatial blockade you placed on us." Asterion smiled and walked over to the two special grade wizards. Baskerville. Forming a seal with his hands, he summoned his faithful companion to protect him from any attacks. Walking to Mahoraga's side, Asterion jumped and sat on the shoulder of his divine general. He crossed his legs and greeted his enemies with an arrogant look. "I hope you enjoyed fighting against my divine general." Herpo twisted his lips upon hearing the boy's words. "Enjoyed it?" He wanted to flee from him at any moment. "We meet again, Air Black," Herpo greeted the 13-year-old boy with a gentle smile. But the next words made his smile stiffen. "Please, don't smile at me, you look like a pedophile smiling at a helpless child," Asterion spoke with a look of disgust reflecting on his face. "I don't have that kind of hobby," Herpo replied with a stiff smile, his tone cold, almost threatening. "You change bodies like you change clothes, who knows what your hobbies are?" "I'd rather spare myself from asking," Asterion spoke, looking at Herpo as if he were looking at a piece of trash. "Some unpleasant scenes involving you and corpses appeared in my mind." Herpo only took a deep breath and restrained himself from k*ling the boy right now. He was in a very dangerous situation at the moment, about to lose this Horcrux at any moment. Asterion turned his gaze to the handsome young man with black hair and red eyes. "Oh, you no longer look like a parasite, half-breed," Asterion spoke sarcastically, his lips curling into a sadistic and cold smile. "I visited your father's grave, a truly unpleasant man even after death. I hope you don't mind me destroying his tomb and the remains of your amiable father." Asterion calling him a half-breed deeply irritated him, but after hearing that his father's remains were destroyed, Voldemort became furious. Don't get it wrong, Voldemort didn't care about his father, he even felt disgust at having a Muggle as a father, but his father's remains were essential for his future complete revival. Now, with Asterion's words, practically all preparations for his revival were thrown in the trash. "I will k*ll you," Voldemort snarled. "I will k*ll you slowly and with much pain, you will suffer and beg for forgiveness as you kneel kissing my feet." Upon hearing this, Asterion extended his hand and showed his trembling hand. "See? I'm shaking with fear." His actions could deceive someone if it weren't for the sarcastic and cold tone of his voice. "Mahoraga." As soon as Asterion finished speaking, the divine general who was waiting for orders moved at that moment. He disappeared from where he was and reappeared almost instantly in front of Voldemort. Voldemort didn't flinch in front of the pale abomination and clashed head-on with punches and kicks. Bang! 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 Every punch hit Mahoraga, causing the chest, neck, and head of the divine general to sink, but it regenerated in the next moment. Voldemort didn't show unhappiness upon seeing this and attacked once more, reinforcing his body to monstrous levels at the same time. He whispered. "Innate spell manipulation, corruption of malevolent gods, universal decay." His fist was covered by a dark and eerie aura, and without hesitation, he punched the divine general. A sonic boom was heard, and Mahoraga was sent flying away. 70% of the divine general's body had completely disappeared, leaving only shoulders, head, and the appendage that looked like a tail. Kang! The golden wheel spun above Mahoraga's head, and in the next moment, it completely regenerated its body while grotesquely smiling at Voldemort. Then I have to destroy his body completely, Voldemort murmured, looking at the monster approaching him. He already had an idea of how to destroy this abomination that could adapt to any attack and action from someone. His domain expansion was perfect for this, but looking at Rose standing not too far away, waiting her turn, and Asterion also waiting, Voldemort concluded that manifesting his domain expansion wouldn't be easy. Voldemort then turned his attention to his only ally still in a condition to help him, the only problem being that the Dark Lord didn't trust anyone, much less a temporary and highly suspicious ally like the wizard from the Middle East. At the same time, Voldemort noticed the weight of using his innate technique using this body was still too heavy, even transmuting Quirinus's body using the Philosopher's Stone, this body in the end still wasn't his, and it was decaying at a rapid pace, even using the Philosopher's Stone to delay this limit, in half an hour at most, this body would turn into a puddle of decomposed black liquid. So, he was in a very compromising position at that moment, with high risks of perishing in the next battle. But Voldemort didn't have time to think further because the Divine General began his onslaught again with extremely fast punches and kicks, each blow breaking the sound barrier. Watching the melee unfolding between Voldemort and Mahoraga, Asterion looked at Herpo and asked curiously, "Aren't you going to help your companion?" Herpo shrugged and replied nonchalantly, "I can tell when someone doesn't trust me. If I join the fight hastily, he might think I'm fighting against him to hand him over in exchange for staying alive. Don't worry about that. You're going to die regardless of what you do. After all, I'm very kind." Showing a gentle smile, Asterion spoke. "I'll give you as food for Baskerville, he has a strict diet of cursed spirits and corpses of my enemies." Herpo rolled his eyes at the shameless words of the boy, "You call that kindness? If you're kind, then I'm an angel." "I must decline your generous offer," Herpo spoke coldly, his gaze briefly focused on Voldemort, and he smirked maliciously. "After all, I have plans to escape." Looking coldly at Herpo, Asterion wanted to see what his plan was to flee. Dodging the sonic punches, Voldemort spun in the air and kicked Mahoraga's head, splattering purple blood on the ground. Even without a head, the Divine General took advantage and grabbed the enemy's leg. Without hesitation, he threw him away, breaking everything in his path, throwing dust and large chunks of earth into the air. Taking advantage of this moment, still in the air, Voldemort stopped using the Philosopher's Stone to heal his body and focused on channeling the monstrous energy inside the stone to accelerate the creation of barriers. Voldemort intentionally reduced the range of the domain expansion to save time. What should have lasted about 1.0 seconds was shortened to 0.4 seconds. In the time it took a human to blink, the barriers manifested covering a radius of 50 meters. Showing a chillingly large grin, Voldemort spoke coldly. "Domain expansion, final decay of the universe." A dark and shadowy space appeared around Voldemort, in the universe full of stars and planets, all the stars seemed to slowly die until finally, only a cold universe remained without any trace of life. The entire body of the Divine General was trapped in a specific corner of the universe, being constantly torn apart while his body regenerated in an endless cycle of destruction and regeneration. Voldemort, seeing this, clenched his teeth and poured even more magical energy, preventing Mahoraga's regeneration from healing as quickly as it was being wounded. At the same time, Herpo didn't even need to make hand seals and spoke. "Domain expansion, workshop of the creation gods." The barriers manifested around them as Herpo laughed maliciously, his laughter filled with cruelty. "You and Rose are arrogant, you underestimate people's will, but the world will teach you how arrogance is the mother of all failures." When he finished speaking, the entire domain expansion fully manifested. "You're right, I am arrogant, but there's something you're wrong about. I never underestimate my enemies." Asterion looked at the domain expansion approaching with an indifferent face. After all, he had long expected that they would use domain expansion. One of the reasons he and Rose allowed them to use it was to deplete Herpo and Voldemort's magical energy. Even for any special grade wizard, manifesting their domain expansion cost an immeasurable amount of magical energy. Behind Asterion, Rose was even faster than Herpo. She intertwined her index finger with her middle finger and spoke. "Domain expansion, infinite void." Rose's expansion manifested so quickly that it collided with Herpo's domain expansion, which was still in the middle of its path towards Asterion.
Thanks for listening.